Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 10, I'm Nadira Tudor. The Christmas chaos continues as a picture emerges of the Prime Minister at a Downing Street quiz last year. President Biden blames climate change for the tornadoes that have killed almost 100 people. And legendary Lewis Hamilton is on the verge of becoming Formula One's most successful driver ever. The Prime Minister is facing further questions about his leadership today after yet more claims emerged of potential rule-breaking at Downing Street last year. This time, a photograph of Boris Johnson sitting close to two colleagues during a quiz has been published by the Sunday Mirror. Household mixing was banned in London at the time. Downing Street says the Prime Minister briefly took part virtually to thank the staff for their hard work during the pandemic. A cabinet minister has confirmed that cases of the Omicron variant are now being treated in hospitals. Nadeem Zahawi says we're in a race to get all adults who are eligible for boosters protected as quickly as possible. It comes as people over the age of 30 in England are invited to book their third dose on Monday. The American president has blamed climate change for one of the largest tornado outbreaks in US history, which killed almost 100 people. The storm swept across several states, causing devastation in Kentucky and Illinois. Tennessee, Arkansas and Missouri were also affected. President Biden pledged to provide whatever's needed following the disaster. Police are searching for Petra Snerkover, a 32-year-old nursing assistant who was last seen on a bus in South London on the 28th of November. Labour MP Harriet Harman has called for the public's help to find her as she and local councillors put up missing person posters.
She's from the Czech Republic. Her parents, of course, are desperately worried about her. And I feel we've all got a particular responsibility to try and help find her because she was away from her home country in the Czech Republic, away from her family, here working in our National Health Service.
And Britain's Lewis Hamilton will start behind title rival Max Verstappen on the grid in today's winner-takes-all Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. The Dutch driver, who's seeking his first ever Formula One title, was 0.3 seconds quicker than Hamilton in yesterday's qualifying. A win for Hamilton will mean a record 8th World Championship, which would make him the most successful driver of all time.
Geez, they were so quick today. In that last run, we couldn't match him. He did a great job. It was looking really, really strong up until then. Through all the practice.
And your weather after patchy rain for some, drier and brighter conditions are expected northwards. Mild for most, with some rain tonight, highs of 12 degrees. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him for God.
Sunday Talk.
Good talk. News talk.
Talk Radio.
The Tice Man cometh.
Stir up your Sundays with Richard Tice.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Wow. Wow, good morning everybody. I've just heard that ident for the first time. I can't quite believe it. Anyway, welcome to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It is Sunday the 12th of December. And what a week it's been in the UK in politics. I don't think there's been much good. There's been plenty of bad and a lot of ugly. And the big question, and I want your input, your views, your tweets on this, is Boris Johnson going to survive? Do you think that he should survive? I've got an action-packed 3-hour show. We're going to be talking about the impact of Plan B that's being introduced this week, that's being voted on in the House of Commons. Vaccine passports, more restrictions, talk about Plan C, D, who knows how far that goes. The impact of potentially mandatory vaccinations, which have already, of course, been introduced into care homes where our loved ones may be. I'm going to be talking to a Durham student who's not a snowflake, because there's plenty of snowflakes elsewhere in Durham. And indeed, I think some of the academics there are snowflakes, cancelling free speech, cancelling professors. Unbelievable what's going on there. We've got to go way out to the east. We've got to talk Ukraine, Russia, what's going on there, and the impact that's going to have on us, on our energy prices closer to home. We've got some great guests on the show, journalists, authors, chief executives, MP, and the anti-woke Durham student commentator. But I want your views, your tweets. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text me on 87222, mentioning the word talk, or tweet us at Talk Radio. And don't forget, you can also download the app, watch us on the website, YouTube, Apple TV, Samsung, and many, many more. There is no excuse not to stay with us this Sunday morning. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
And a very good morning to you. It is Sunday the 12th of December. It's 6 minutes past 10. This is Tice Talk. And I always like to start my show here on Sunday with my own Sunday sermon. And it's extraordinary to think, isn't it, that it's exactly 2 years ago today that there was the 2019 general election. Can you believe it? I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago. I remember it very well. I was campaigning in Hartlepool and Boris won that 80-seat majority and he looked set for 10 years in power. He was the big man. He was the power man. He was the strong man. And we were free from the madness of all the angst that had gone on in Parliament over Brexit. And it looked finally that, yes, Brexit would be done. Little did we know that already, even as we were voting, COVID was circulating around. And little did we know, of course, that the Chinese communist regime knew it was circulating, but they were working out what to do, who to tell, whether to cover it up or not. And it's incredible, since then, what's happened. We've all learned a whole new language of words and acronyms that we'd never heard of before. I mean, who'd heard of LFTs or PCRs or mRNAs, antibodies, antivirals, epidemiologists, virologists, chief medical officers, chief scientific officers, tiers, lockdowns, nightingales? What have I forgotten? Tell me some other language that you've learnt in the last 2 years. Keep it clean, please. It's a family show. But literally, COVID has changed everything. And now we're forced. I mean, who'd have thought 2 years ago that we'd be forced to wear in many cases, dirty, smelly, fairly useless cloth in front of our face? Who'd have thought that Boris Johnson would force us to carry a vaccine passport? Who'd have thought that Boris Johnson, the great libertarian, would want us to have a national conversation about forced, mandatory vaccinations? And yet, 2 years later, Boris, the power man, the strong man, his own presence in number 10 is literally under threat. It's just 1 week ago last week that the first vaccine went into the 90-year-old Margaret Keenan, the first British arm it went into. And we were told then, just around Christmas time last year, in a great headline in one of the big Sunday newspapers, 15 million jabs to freedom. Do you remember that? 15 million jabs to freedom, and Rishi Sunak wrote articles saying freedom would be around February time. Here we are, folks, 1 year later. Just have a guess how many jabs have gone into British arms. It's not 15 million, it's not 30 million, it's not 60 million, it's not 90 million. It's 120 million jabs. 120 million jabs into our arms. Have we got freedom? Far from it. We're facing even more restrictions, even greater obligations on our lives, things that we never possibly imagined. So what happened to that freedom? And if you can have that pace of change, that impact on our lives, those restrictions on our lives, what I want you to think about is what happens going forward another year or two, because the pace of change is terrifying. I'll just leave you with a few thoughts of my own. Now, Boris is famous for his promises. Here's one promise he made earlier this year, that there would be, of course, a public inquiry into COVID and everything that took place. And he said that would start in the spring of 2022, so that's early next year. My prediction is there'll be no public inquiry next year. I don't even think there'll ever be a public inquiry. I really don't. And you know, with Boris's promises, frankly, if you believe the opposite, you'll probably end up somewhere nearer the truth. If there was going to be a public inquiry next year, surely they would have started to talk about the terms of reference, the panel members, who's going to be on that inquiry. We've heard absolutely nothing. I don't think it'll happen. I think it'll be too embarrassing for everybody, for the leaders of the Tory party, for the leaders of the Labour Party, for the leaders of the NHS, for the leaders of the establishment. They will do everything they can not to have a public inquiry. My other prediction, in about 2 years' time, cash will become almost extinct. It's happening now. And actually, for me, that's a real sadness. I love, a roll of tenors paying for things. My late uncle, he always used to have the expression, which I enjoy, cash is king. I think that's probably true, actually. I think we're going to move towards a central bank digital currency. We know that Rishi Sunak's got a consulting group looking at that as we speak. That's a sort of official version of cryptocurrency. And indeed, cryptocurrency may even be banned from trading in developed Western nations. We'll have more on cryptocurrencies in a later show. And I think that we're going to see more scandals and concerns and anxieties, a lot more data coming out about what's gone on with vaccines and why it's not 15 million. It won't be 120 million, will it? It'll be 250 million or 500 million vaccines. We've no idea. Is it once a year to have a booster? Is it twice a year? Is it 4 times a year? Or will we end up just with some form of vaccine drip just attached to our arm so that we can quietly take a little dose when we feel a bit rough? Who knows? What I do think also over the next is by the time of the next general election, whether that's in 23 or 24, my prediction is that Boris Johnson will not be Prime Minister. He'll not be leading the Conservative Party. My other prediction is that Cressida Dick will not last until the expiry of her term of office in April 24. The other thing that hopefully will happen over the next 2 years is that there will be much more discussion about treatments for COVID. Because, look, we all know the names of the vaccines and we talk about them all over the place. You know, which one have you had? What do you like? What's made you feeling a bit rough or not feeling a bit rough? We all know these names. Why don't we know the names of the treatments that have been approved and are just about starting to be used by the NHS? For example, Ronapreve or Molnupiravir or Paxlovid. Why don't we know those names? We need to think about those. We need to be talking a lot more about those. Why haven't we heard how the Oxford trial into ivermectin is going? I hope over the next 2 years we'll be talking less about vaccines and more about treatments, because the only way out of this crisis, as we can clearly see, yes, vaccines reduce hospitalisations and mercifully reduce deaths, but 120 million jabs later, they're not easing the restrictions, are they? So we need the treatments to give us confidence and self-belief. That's my Sunday prayer, that in future we're going to focus on the treatments. And here endeth my Sunday sermon. Give me your views. Give me a call. Do you think Boris should stay or do you think he should go? 0344 499 1000. This is Tice Talk. It's 10:14. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Get a grip.
Raw talk, pure energy, more taste, more flavour, more outspoken than ever.
Clear-headed, honest opinion.
Lively debate.
Talk Radio.
And welcome back to Tice Talk here on Sunday the 12th of December. It's 10:17 and we're going to be talking about Plan B now because it's coming in this week and we can't in a way understand why. I mean, yes, we've got Omicron, but where's the data that shows it's a real concern? Why is the government doing this? Well, there's a big vote in Parliament on Tuesday. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I'm going to be talking now to someone who's been campaigning against the restrictions really for many, many months. The author, broadcaster, journalist, podcast host, Bev Turner, about what's going on? Why is the government bringing in these additional restrictions, given that 120 million jabs later, I thought we were heading towards freedom? Bev, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday. And we haven't actually quite got Bev, so I'm just going to go to a couple of tweets whilst waiting for Bev to link up. We've got one here from Lord Drew who says, Boris needs to go, but big question, who could replace him? That's a very fine question. Well, I think there's lots of chats going on quietly in WhatsApp and on the telephone in various tea rooms in the Tory party. I've heard even that some of the main contenders are lining up campaign teams. Who knows? There's a lot going on. There's a big week. So we've got another tweet in here, which is a refreshingly candid conversation from a politician about the limits of vaccines and how they aren't, in fact, the silver bullet out of lockdown. I think we've now got Bev with us. Bev, very good morning to you. So thanks for joining me. This is an extraordinary week ahead of us. We've got now the UK government bringing in vaccine passports here in England, when I'm struggling to see the evidence elsewhere in the world, indeed elsewhere in the UK, Bev, that actually they work, that they make any form of difference whatsoever. What's your view of why the government is doing this, and the further risks then beyond that, with talk about a national conversation about mandatory vaccinations, Bev?
I mean, like so many of the instances that we've struggled to comprehend this last 18 months, I feel like there's a complete lack of explanation from the government. They never answer this question, why? You know, whether it was vaccinating children or, you know, locking us in our homes intermittently. I would say right at the beginning in the spring, in March 2020, we all agreed that there was cautionary principle was sensible at that point. And then as the 18 months has gone on, they just seem to be seeing what they can get away with. They're just pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, and never feel that they have to explain their logic for this. And so it feels now with the vote on Tuesday about whether we have vaccine passports in England as well, to go along with Wales and Scotland, I think everybody has to contact their MP to ask why. There are, I think, about 60 Conservative MPs now who are going to vote against it, which is great. Jeremy Corbyn has come out and said he is not going to vote for this. So, you know, it's not a right and left issue anymore either. It's just, for me, it's just we're at a point in history where you're either on the right side of morality or you're not. And I think we are going to end up, therefore, being on the right side of history or not. I think partly, though, Richard, and I do sympathise with people who are in support of vaccine passports because they sound like the kind of thing that might keep you safe. But as you say, there is absolutely no evidence to suggest they do anything to minimise transmission. If anything, the opposite seems to be true. So the mass gathering, sports events, etc., music, where they trialled them, you know, we all know of people who went to those, vaccinated with a vaccine passport and caught COVID. And yet those who didn't have the vaccine passports, who maybe did a negative lateral flow, were not the infectious people in those environments. So it's satire. It's ludicrous. It makes no logical sense. And I hate it when the government put out something that is going to be so compromising to everybody's liberty in a way that we just can't imagine at the moment, without explaining why. It's not based in science.
My real concern here, Bev, is that this is... I think it's completely unjustified. I mean, you know, even people like Bill Gates, indeed, even Boris Johnson said that, of course, the vaccines don't stop transmission, they don't stop infection, you know, but they do reduce hospitalisation and death. And that, of course, is great. So if they don't stop transmission, they might reduce it for a matter of weeks, according to sort of data from the likes of Pfizer. If they don't stop transmission and they don't stop infection, what's the point of them other than a form of control and fear-mongering?
It can only be that. And again, I just feel like the government are not being honest with us. I don't think we're having debates about this in the media, and all of those sort of daytime chat shows where we discuss the news that I go on to, nobody's talking about what could a vaccine passport morph into? And, you know, what does that mean for our liberty? And no government is going to give up this sort of power once they've got it. So we have to kind of picture what this is going to mean in actuality. And is it that you are going to have to declare whether you are on antidepressants? Are you on contraception because the government wants to reduce the birth rate? Does that become mandatory? Are you going to have regular tests for your sexual health because the government are concerned about chlamydia in an area? I mean, we have to use our imagination to see where this goes. Because at the moment, we're in a climate of fear still, unnecessary fear, I believe. And whilst people are frightened, governments across the world can push through all sorts of restrictive measures. But we have to stop. There is no emergency here that we need saving from. If you are over 70, this has been consistent throughout the last 18 months. If you are over 70, you are at a slightly higher risk of dying from COVID than you are from flu. If you are under 70, you are more likely to die from flu than you are from COVID-19. And that very fact, that is not my opinion, that's not something to say, well, I don't agree with you on that. That's the kind of thing, I don't agree with you. Well, that's the data. And unfortunately, we've lost all sense of perspective. And I hope that's reassuring to people, as opposed to making them feel that somehow they've been duped. That should be reassuring. We are getting out of the other side of this. We have had, as you say, 120 million vaccines. If not now, when, Richard?
Well, I think that's the... When. But it's quite clear that it doesn't stop here. And I go back to the headline last Christmas, 15 million jabs to freedom, 120 million jabs later, and we've got more restrictions than ever. Later in this hour, Bev, I've got a Labour MP, Khalid Mahmood, coming on to explain why he thinks actually vaccine passports are good and why the majority of the Labour Party presumably are going to support it on Tuesday, which therefore means essentially, almost regardless of the size of the rebellion by Tory MPs, it is going to go through. And let's just talk a little bit now, Bev, about this national conversation that Boris wants to have on mandatory vaccinations. I mean, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, it's a pretty short conversation. No thanks. What's your view on it? And where do you think this goes?
Somebody had said to us in February 2020, by Christmas 21, we would have a prime minister who would talk about the mandating of a drug which is not yet fully licensed into the arms of people who don't want it. We wouldn't believe it, Richard. That's not the country we live in. That's not the Western liberal democracy that we live in. If you want to have the vaccine and you are happy that you are fully informed and you have looked at your individual risk-benefit analysis and decided you want to have it, then fantastic. But the idea that what does that even look like? Is this about fining people, which I believe is it Austria where they're fining you now if you don't have your vaccine? Is it literally somebody knocking on the door and tying you down to a bed? I hope not. But at the moment, I feel like anything is possible. It's so terrifying that we have a government that just say, we will never. That's a very simple conversation. We will never talk about mandatory vaccinations. Well, of course, we already are with healthcare workers and NHS workers. So we're already moving down that very slippery slope.
And I'm talking, in my second hour, Bev, I'm going to be talking to the chief executive of one of the largest care home providers about the impact on their business of losing staff who didn't want to take the vaccine. But here's the thing, Bev. There are some very, very senior journalists who seem to be part of this campaign about mandatory vaccination. I'm talking about Andrew Neil, Andrew Pearce, Jeremy Vine, Nick Ferrari, and then Karen Brady. All of these very significant senior figures in the world of journalism, broadcasting, sort of semi-celebrities themselves, who are all writing articles talking about it, about why actually mandatory vaccination is the way to go. And anybody who doesn't want mandatory vaccination is in some way selfish.
At its very core, what those people are doing, and I'm trying to be charitable here, is they are failing to do a proper risk assessment. We're all familiar with risk assessments. If you work in a business and you've spilled something on the floor, you put a sign down to say you're going to slip on that, otherwise someone gets sued. Everybody understands risk assessment. And I think what those people are doing is they're overestimating the risk of COVID-19 on everybody, and presumably on themselves, because they must be terrified. They must be on an individual level. They must be terrified. and they are underestimating the risks from the vaccines. And on that balance, they're coming to the conclusion that they are always a good thing. You cannot mandate anything that has a side effect of death, no matter how rare. And you can talk to Lisa Shaw's husband about whether the jab should be mandated. She was the BBC reporter who lost her life.
Indeed. They seem to forget that, don't they, rather conveniently?
And, you know, and if you are not looking all the time at mainstream media, and if you are on alternative media sources, which I am on Instagram and Twitter, we see the cases of vaccine injury that don't get reported. And maybe it's just that those presenters, those hosts don't know about those people, because those people get censored. They get censored if they put a post up on their Instagram of themselves from hospital explaining, I was a healthy 21-year-old and I had the vaccine and now I have terrible neurological issues and the doctors don't know how to fix it. Maybe those presenters just don't know about those people.
Yeah.
And therefore, I want to sort of, in my heart, I want to forgive them for their misunderstanding, because they are people that I admire. I have admired for many years.
We all do, because actually they're brilliant journalists. They're colleagues of yours, Bev. Just whilst we've been speaking, Bev, we've got one tweet that's come in here. Once the EU introduces vaccine passports, ID cards in the EU, of course, we in the UK will have to have one to enter the EU. You know, this is where it's going. And just breaking news, Bev, as we've been speaking again, Keir Starmer has confirmed that Labour will vote for Plan B and vaccine passports on Tuesday.
Just what's happened to the world? I just wish I could have half an hour in a room with these guys, because I genuinely think that, is there something more pernicious going on here? Like, is it about, you know, a higher power of global technocrats pulling their strings and holding them to ransom? We just don't know.
We don't know. What we do know, Bev, is that if we're going to have to campaign and battle, otherwise I fear this is coming our way. We just don't know where it's going. Bev Turner, we could talk for hours on this. Thank you so much for your contribution here on Tice Talk this morning. Coming up after the break, we're going to be taking some calls. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Should Boris stay or go? Who should replace him? What do you fear over the next 2 years? It's 10:30. It's time for the news. It's Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. The Christmas chaos continues as a picture emerges of the Prime Minister at a Downing Street quiz last year. And legendary Lewis Hamilton is on the verge of becoming Formula One's most successful driver ever. The Prime Minister is facing further questions about his leadership today after yet more claims emerged of potential rule-breaking at Downing Street last year. This time, a photograph of Boris Johnson sitting close to two colleagues during a quiz has been published by the Sunday Mirror. Household mixing was banned in London at the time. Downing Street says the Prime Minister briefly took part virtually to thank the staff for their hard work during the pandemic. A Cabinet Minister has confirmed that cases of the Omicron variant are now being treated in hospitals. Nadeem Zahawi says we're in a race to get all adults who are eligible for boosters protected as quickly as possible. It comes as people over the age of 30 in England are invited to book their third dose on Monday. Police are searching for Petra Snerkover, a 32-year-old nursing assistant who was last seen on a bus in South London on the 28th of November. Labour MP Harriet Harman has called for the public's help to find her as she and local councillors put up missing person posters. And Britain's Lewis Hamilton will start behind title rival Max Verstappen on the grid in today's winner-takes-all Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. The Dutch driver, who's seeking his first ever Formula One title, was 0.3 seconds quicker than Hamilton in yesterday's qualifying. A win for Hamilton will mean a record 8th World Championship, which would make him the most successful driver of all time.
Geez, they were so quick today. In that last run, we couldn't match him. He did a great job. It was looking really, really strong up until then, through all the practice.
That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
World headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice, Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 10:33. We were just talking there to Bev Turner about Plan B, the restrictions. We hear the Labour Party is going to vote for it on Tuesday. The tweets have been coming in about the vaccines, and we've got one here from Sarah C saying we need a government actively campaigning against vaccine passports being required anywhere in the world as opposed to justifying them. Another one here about Boris from Seb saying we really think the Tories need to get someone from outside their government as a new leader, effectively suggesting a clean sweep, and agree on a new leader to avoid a painful leadership battle. Well, that's an interesting point if it gets that far. We're going to go to your calls. First up this morning, we've got John from, where's John from? I can't quite see that. But John, good morning to you.
Good morning, Richard. Torquay in Devon.
Torquay in Devon.
First of all, I would just want to say amen to your prayer, because everything you mentioned, this is, for me, this is the definitive show here today that hopefully could change everything, because everything you mentioned in that prayer, everything I've heard so far, even with Beverly, I think this is where we need to start the fight, because it is getting into dangerous territory. I think Boris is actually a puppet. I think somebody else is pulling the strings, and I think he will be forced out, because I do believe quietly from somebody I know who's in the civil service that he's against the...
Well, John, he used to be known, didn't he, as a great libertarian. I mean, this is the guy back in about 2004 who said with regard to ID cards that if anybody forced him to carry an ID card, he would chop it up, grind it up, put it on his cornflakes and eat them.
Absolutely. And we have to be very careful, because the minute you start going across a certain line, again, what you said earlier about suppressed information in the science, suppressed journalism, suppressing other opinions, we have to be careful we don't get labelled as conspiracy theorists. But I'm reliably informed that Geppetto Gove is pulling the strings for Pinocchio Johnson. I don't know if that's correct. That's an opinion and a thing I've been given. But I think we are going into very dangerous territory. Digital ID, if you want to bring in digital ID, then fair enough in a technology world, an exponential age, like you said, that's moving vastly, quickly, at pace. Bring in a digital ID, but don't base it on medical intervention. It's not...
Well, that's the thing. So, John, how quickly do you think that the Tories, if you think he's going to go, do you think that's going to happen quickly, or do you think they're going to wait and see nearer the election what's happening to the polls and his electoral prospects?
I think the fact that, if what I've heard is correct, he's digging his heels in. They want him out so they can bring in the vaccine passports, bring in this next phase and force it through. This is my belief, and this is what's happening. I think the vaccine passports are coming in. Regardless, I think what you might find mandating rather than jab initially, there'll be the mandation of test and trace, so everybody gets used to using the digital passport. I think that's probably more of a sinister thing we need to worry about, particularly in the initial thing. It's going to be devastating for the economy, and I think the fact that other people want him to go, they're using him as a scapegoat to bring in the ultimate things. And I'm trying not to be conspiratorial.
This is the thing, isn't it? I mean, look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's just when you look back, and that's what I try to do in my Sunday sermon, you just think the pace of what's happened, it's just extraordinary. My concern, I hate the idea of the vaccine passports, to be honest. As I see, they don't actually achieve anything. But the other thing is, it's the thin end of the wedge, isn't it, John? And where does that go from here in terms of other information that they then start to put on them and the ability for them to watch you and control you wherever you go and whatever you spend?
Correct. You had a retired doctor, not yourself, I don't know, he probably has been on your show, Dr. Tony Hinton, who made a sentence about 3 weeks ago that these digital passports, these vaccine passports will morph into digital identity. If this is the way, and if you look at, there's lots of research from top financial people about the exponential age, digital currencies, things coming in. If that's the road we're going down in technology, just be frankly honest about it and be educated. The same with the science. Don't bring in a passport for something that's not stopping transmission, not stopping infection.
And even that's right. And even the Prime Minister and Bill Gates actually agree with that. John, thank you for those thoughts. And we've got some other interesting tweets just come in here. We've got one here from Ben, which is saying he's got lung disease. Whenever he gets a cold, he's hospitalised. The young, the old, others with underlying conditions can suffer from COVID. Yes, we know that, and that's the success of the vaccines, and that will be the success of the treatments, which is why we needed to hear so much more about them. And we've got another tweet coming in here. Where are we? We've got another tweet from Jez, who says the reason Labour and Tories are voting for restrictions, vaccine passports, is because they're reacting to opinion polls. And that's politics. Sorry, that's not politics. That's populism. Interesting thought. I think we've got Diana on the line as well. Diana, very good morning to you. You're in Kent. What are your thoughts? Right. What would you like to say this morning?
Hello, Richard. Great to speak to you. I've got a real concern that over the last week, none of the media, and I'm really surprised it wasn't picked up on Talk Radio as well, they haven't been discussing the changes to the police bill that's going through Parliament at the minute. And one big concern about it is it was read in Parliament and then it went off to the Lords, but the government added clauses to it that Parliament never got to see because they added them on. It's now in the Lords before it comes back. And I want to know why the media aren't discussing it.
This is the sentencing bill, isn't it, Diana?
That's right, yeah.
I guess, because, what are your thoughts? Is there specific clauses that you're aware of, that you've heard or seen that are concerning you specifically?
Absolutely, yes. There's one that's it will give someone who is peacefully protesting a criminal record. If you have deemed by the police to have done something inappropriate or wrong, and that's the wording in it, it's deemed. And I don't know the entire wording, but so it's down to their discretion. If you then go to another protest, you'll get a criminal record. And I think the government are doing it because they don't want people to protest against digital ID, mandatory vaccination, and it's to stop the protests in the future.
Indeed. I mean, the reality is, of course, there's just been so much other things going on in the news with all the drama around the Prime Minister, around the introduction of Plan B, around the parties. In a sense, this has just quietly slipped below the radar. And I share your concern, but I've got to be honest, Diana, I haven't been able to scrutinise it. I guess we can only hope that some sensible, like-minded, MPs from any part of the House who believe in liberty and democracy and the right to protest will be properly scrutinising it when it comes back from the Lords. And actually, whatever we think of the House of Lords, they can be a very wise, experienced, scrutinising chamber to look at the detailed wording and highlight sometimes the intended consequences, but sometimes the unintended consequences of the language in these bills. Do you draw any comfort from that or not?
Well, yes, if they do that, that would be great. I hope they do, because it's coming back on Wednesday to Parliament, and it's going to get voted on this Wednesday. And I know there's going to be protesters there, and I'd really love it if Talk Radio actually got a reporter down there, because there was protest last week about it, and it's not had coverage. And I think these Boris Johnson stories and the parties, it's another way of distracting from what's really going on in Parliament.
Well, there's just so much going on at the moment. I mean, I think it's just genuinely hard for anybody, frankly. Whether just normal folk going around their daily lives, or whether it's the media, or indeed MPs just keeping up with the machinations of what's going on and the pressures on Number 10. Diana, thank you very much for those thoughts. Well, no doubt you will keep a very close eye on it. So we've got some more tweets just coming in. One here from a telephone number. Message comes in that just proves about Keir Starmer, saying he's got no backbone or ideas. He says Boris is unfit to lead the country, and yet Starmer backs everything he tries to bring in. and in a sense this is actually from I think it's Jason Dudley. He says that Starmer would probably go into a full lockdown. It's a good point actually, because let's remember Keir Starmer back in early July, when we finally came fully out of lockdown, he said it was reckless, didn't he? And actually, I think we came out of lockdown way too late. I think the collateral damage of lockdowns is completely underestimated and huge. But Labour wouldn't, they said it was reckless to come out of lockdowns, and actually it turned out to be the right thing to do, because since then, in a sense, many more people actually gained natural immunity, which is why actually at the situation we're now in a better situation, I would say very definitively, than many of the European countries. So here we are. We've got one here from Angela in a tweet. She says that she will refuse to scan in with an NHS app. In fact, she's deleted both NHS apps. So but here's an alternative one from Patrick, who says, with a bit of fruity language as well, which I won't read out. What is wrong with ID cards? If you've nothing to hide, get an ID card. It'll cut crime and fraud enormously. Well, that's one view from Patrick, but it's about what's the information stored on it. And we in the UK, we've never been an ID cards, papers, please type society. It's a huge step to go, yes, there are other European countries that have them, but if you're going to make such a massive leap, surely that's the sort of thing, Prime Minister, that we should be having a big national conversation about. Maybe that's the sort of thing that should go into a manifesto, or indeed, I quite like referendums, or indeed the sort of thing that we could have a referendum on. I like lots of referendums. I rather like the Swiss style, where if you've got big things, important things that affect all of our lives, then actually we should have an open debate, a national conversation, and then have a referendum. It's 10:45. Coming up after the break, we're going to be speaking to Labour MP Khalid Mahmood about why he, and indeed now it turns out the Labour Party, are going to be supporting vaccine passports. And then just in the beginning of the second hour, we're going to be talking to the Chief Executive of Four Seasons Healthcare about the impact of mandatory vaccines on his care home business. You're listening to Tice Talk here at the home of common sense. It is, of course, this Sunday morning, Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Spreading your opinions.
These boots were made for talking.
Outweigh and outlast all other arguments.
Plain talking, pioneering.
Let's broaden our minds.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 10:48 here on Sunday the 12th of December. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's here on Talk Radio. And I'm delighted to say that now we're going to be looking at the other side of the vaccine passport debate, because we were talking earlier with Bev Turner about her concerns, about my concerns about vaccine passports, their effectiveness and where it leads. But it's really good to look at both sides of that debate. And so I'm joined now by the Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr. We've got Khalid Mahmood, who's going to put forward why he thinks, and indeed it seems the Labour Party, are going to vote for vaccine passports. Khalid, a very good morning to you. So my concern about vaccine passports, Khalid, to be absolutely clear with you, is that around Europe indeed, where vaccine passports have been used, whether it's Belgium, whether it's Germany, and indeed here in the UK, in Scotland and in Wales, we've had vaccine passports. And yet actually it doesn't seem to have had any impact on the number of cases. In Germany, for example, Khalid, cases are at record levels. And we've had the Prime Minister and Bill Gates admit that vaccines, they don't stop transmission and they don't stop reinfection. So please help me. What's the advantage of vaccine passports?
Well, good morning. I think the advantage of vaccine passports, first of all, is that by and large, you've got people who aren't transmitting as much as people who have absolutely no protection at all. And secondly, are guarded against infection. You say quite rightly that people do get infection. Of course they do. But the fact is the severity of that infection is really downgraded by having that sort of vaccine passport, because you've had the vaccine.
Let's be clear. It's having the vaccine that reduces the severity of the impact, not having a vaccine passport.
Well, you have a vaccine passport because you've had the vaccine.
Yes,
so that's what it shows, and that's clear that once you have the vaccine, you get the passport. Therefore, it puts you under lesser.
But even I think it's Pfizer admit that it only reduces transmission a bit for a matter of weeks. I think they talked about 10 to 12 weeks. So the impact is, in terms of reduced transmission, is at best marginal.
But you're much better protected from that transmission. Once if you gain it, what you have is you still have resistance inside you because you've had the vaccine. So therefore, it increases your chance of mortality and not going into hospital with a serious condition.
Which is a matter of personal choice, surely.
Well, no, it's not a matter of choice, because what we do in terms of vaccines and vaccine passports and people who don't want to have a vaccine is simply this, that whilst you may not want this vaccine, and that's fine, you're entitled to that opinion. But when you go out and you're actually transmitting that virus to other people deliberately because you've not taken that, I think there has to be a responsibility in community and society for people who have taken those precautions to be further susceptible to higher grade of transmission because you haven't taken that's the vaccine that's required. So a passport would tell people, those that are going into closed environments where it's much more transmitted, as you understand quite rightly, if you go into major events where there are lots of people there together already.
But Khalid, look, let's be clear. I'm pro-choice. I've been jabbed. I'm not going to give a running commentary as to how many jabs I'm having in the future. Who knows? But I've been double jabbed. But the point is, we've seen, for example, in some major events where they've had vaccine passports, we've seen actually COVID spread. So the reality is, it's not the passport that reduces the spread, is it?
Well, it's a vaccine that reduces the spread, and what all the passport does is let people know that
if the vaccine reduces the spread, how can you have a big event where lots of people go, they've all got vaccine passports or lateral flow tests, and then actually you get a major outbreak of COVID from that event? Surely that's yet more proof it makes no difference.
Well, it does make a difference. And I think if you look at scientifically, if you look at what's gone on in Wales by and large as well, where we had some of these already the vaccine passports, the severity of the virus is downgraded quite significantly because you have protection. And that's the whole idea, is more people have protection that are going to an event and less people are transmitting it because they have no protection, not for themselves or for anybody else. And that increases the chance.
So can you help me with Germany, for example, which have had vaccine passports, they've had N95 surgical masks, and they're facing, for about a year or so, and they're facing record number of cases, I think give or take double their previous record. I'm struggling to compute this.
Well, the reason I think part of the issue in Germany is the vaccination rates aren't as high as we have in the UK. And that's the key thing again, is that the more people that have vaccine, the less the transmission rates are. And this is a problem not just in Germany, but across Europe. If you look at their rates compared to us, we are quite significantly onto a third jab now. We are quite significantly advanced in that. And that's why more people that have those vaccines, the more protection you get. And that's what the whole idea is to show that you are much more better protected. So therefore, if you do even contract the virus, you are much safer and hopefully won't end up in hospital, and hopefully it won't end up in the mortality.
So Khaled, can you let's take the conversation a bit further forward, because I think this is really helpful. So it sounds like you probably favour the starting the national conversation about mandatory vaccines, and it sounds like you might be in favour of mandatory vaccines, like as is being proposed in some other European countries. Is that right?
No, I'm not in favour of mandatory vaccines, purely because I think people do have a choice. But I think what the passports do and the lateral flow tests do, if you're going into an event, is make people aware whether you should be engaged in that environment or not. So therefore, if you want to make a choice that you don't want to take the vaccine, you should be less able to infect other people. So therefore, you can have your choice, but you'll have to give up some privileges that you want.
So in a sense, you're going to have mandatory vaccination by another route, by the back door, basically. You're going to make life sufficiently impossible for people to lead. Do you fancy the I think it's the Greek route, where you either find people, or possibly the Austrian route, where people are locked down until they're vaccinated?
No, and neither does. What I've said quite clearly is that you have the system that's been proposed now, either a flow test or a vaccine for you to be able to gain entry. You have a privilege. All of us have a privilege in this. And if you don't want to have a vaccine for yourself, that's fine. But where your transmittability is much higher, that's not fair to everybody else. So everybody else has a right as well. And you can't put them at risk because you don't want to do that yourself. So therefore, there has to be an element of degree of perhaps isolation, and that's the way that we have to look at this.
So Khaled, we're just double checking the vaccination numbers, because it appears actually that Germany is very, very similar in vaccination rate, fully vaccinated, to the UK. We'll just check that, because sometimes the numbers vary depending on whether you include teenagers, for example. But I think the other point is
had many doses as we've had, Richard. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the other question is, where does this end, Khaled? Because essentially, we've had 120 million jabs. We were told it was 15 million jabs to freedom, and basically we've got boosters forever. What about the focus, surely, on treatments is where I really want the debate to be moving towards, because treatments are as much or potentially more the way out of this crisis.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Look, prevention is always much better than the cure, and I totally believe in that. But I think what we've had to do, the timescale that we've had to deal with this very, very complicated virus, in order for our pharmaceuticals and all the medical people who've been trying to resist this and finding a cure to an extent, the blocking cure that we have with the vaccines that we have at the moment, we've done well. But I think what we need to do is do more. I think a lot of companies are still carrying on developing some of those issues.
That's right.
We need to do that, and we need to continue to do that.
Without question, we need more focus on the treatments. More treatments will be released and approved in due course. Khaled Mahmood, the Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr, thank you so much for those thoughts here on Tice Talk this morning. Really, really useful. Time is 10:58. Coming up after the news, after the top of the hour, we're going to be talking to the Chief Executive of Four Seasons Healthcare. It's 10:58. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV. News.
Live at 11, I'm Nadira Tudor. The Christmas chaos continues as a picture emerges of the Prime Minister at a Downing Street quiz last year. President Biden blames climate change for the tornadoes that have killed almost 100 people. And legendary Lewis Hamilton is on the verge of becoming Formula One's most successful driver ever. The Prime Minister is facing further questions about his leadership today after yet more claims emerged of potential rule-breaking at Downing Street last year. This time, a photograph of Boris Johnson sitting close to two colleagues during a quiz has been published by the Sunday Mirror. Household mixing was banned in London at the time. Downing Street says the Prime Minister briefly took part virtually to thank the staff for their hard work during the pandemic. A cabinet minister has confirmed that cases of the Omicron variant are now being treated in hospitals. Nadeem Zahawi says we're in a race to get all adults who are eligible for boosters protected as quickly as possible. It comes as people over the age of 30 in England are invited to book their third dose on Monday. The American president has blamed climate change for one of the largest tornado outbreaks in US history, which killed almost 100 people. The storm swept across several states, causing devastation in Kentucky and Illinois. Tennessee, Arkansas and Missouri were also affected. Some meteorologists have been left shocked by the disaster.
I was watching the radar last night and I was saying, wait a second, this is December. How is this happening in December? This is the kind of thing you would only see at the height of the season, March, April, May. I'd never seen anything like this this time of year.
Police are searching for Petra Srinkova, a 32-year-old nursing assistant who was last seen on a bus in South London on the 28th of November. Labour MP Harriet Harman has called for the public's help to find her as she and local councillors put up missing person posters.
She's from the Czech Republic. Her parents, of course, are desperately worried about her. And I feel we've all got a particular responsibility to try and help find her because she was away from her home country in the Czech Republic, away from her family, here working in our National Health Service.
And Britain's Lewis Hamilton will start behind title rival Max Verstappen on the grid in today's winner-takes-all Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. The Dutch driver was 0.3 seconds quicker than Hamilton in yesterday's qualifying. A win for Hamilton will mean a record 8th World Championship, which would make him the most successful driver of all time. And your weather: after patchy rain, for some drier and brighter conditions are expected northwards. Mild for most, with some rain tonight, highs of 12 degrees. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Mid-morning talk.
Sunday talk.
Talk Radio. Take a chance with the Tice Man.
Talk Radio. Richard Tice.
Sunday morning devotion, there isn't a sermon.
Talk Radio's Common Sense Weekend.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It is 3 minutes past 11. We're into the second hour, and as I look outside, the weather and the skies have got darker and gloomier, which is maybe slightly how many people feel given the week ahead and given the news that the Labour Party will vote for vaccine passports. And we've just had Khalid Mahmood, the Labour MP, on talking about vaccine passports. I think it's fair to say, judging by the reaction on Twitter, the tweets we've been coming in, I hugely respect Khalid for having the courage to come on and talk about it, but I don't think that the listeners and viewers agree with him. There's one here which is probably the most civil one. Mahmood is the reason I will never vote Labour. Why do you give these people oxygen is beyond me. Well, I think the point is we actually want to have a debate. We want to be prepared to discuss both sides. And if someone's got a logical, rational reason on the other side of the argument, let's hear it. I just think, and Khalid tried really well, but I just think he's fundamentally wrong. And I think you heard it there, that actually Labour seems potentially quite willing to go down the sort of the mandatory vaccination route. And this is coming up, folks. Watch out. This is the next big battleground. Anyway, we're going to now be looking at the impact of mandatory vaccinations on care home staff. And I'm delighted to be joined, I think as a first on Talk Radio, by the Chief Executive of the Four Seasons Healthcare Group, Jeremy Richardson, to talk about this. A very good morning to you, Jeremy. Thanks for spending a bit of time on your Sunday morning. So, I mean, your care home group is one of, if not the biggest, amongst the biggest care home groups in the country. So you're seeing daily, weekly, monthly the impact. Just give us, firstly, please, Jeremy, sort of the situational context of the impact on your staff of these mandatory vaccines and the mood both amongst staff and residents and indeed visitors.
Yeah, morning, Richard. You're right. We are one of the largest care home groups in the country, and we have had to deal with the impact of the mandating of the vaccines. So just to give you some context, we have 12,500 team members. We think we've lost, and I say think because we had to fire 49 people on the 11th of November. So that was the deadline. But in the run up to that, we estimate about 150 people in advance left before that because they weren't prepared to hang around until the end of the process. We've lost 1.6% of our team members as a consequence of the decision to mandate the vaccine. And if I step back from that, ultimately I've got two real responsibilities. One is to make sure that my residents are as safe as possible. And the second is to try to give those people the very best quality of life that I can. And so what I'm trying to do is measure up relative risk and the consequences of the decisions that we're making. And if I look at the relative risk presented by COVID, again, to give you some figures, and apologies for the data, since January the 1st, 2020, the beginning of the pandemic, we have suffered less deaths than we have on average on a per 1,000 resident basis over the course of the last 5 years. So that's deaths from all causes.
Death from all causes since January 20?
Since January 20, pre the beginning of the pandemic.
Wow.
And bear in mind that we have got, pardon the expression, a sort of petri dish of the most vulnerable, frail, elderly people in society. So these are the people who are most at risk from the virus. If I then think about the context of COVID itself, since March the 1st of this year, so 2021, we've suffered 2,220 deaths, again, below the 5-year average. And of that number, 27 deaths have been as a result of COVID.
So that's 1%.
It's 1.2%.
1.2%.
And so then when I think about the relative risk presented by COVID and the relative risk presented by sacking 1.6% of my team, and I think about the consequences to the residents, it's very clear to me that the greater risk is presented by lack of team than it is from the virus itself.
I mean, that's really, really significant, and some incredible figures and numbers and data there. Just think about that. So you've got less deaths this year since March than the 5-year average, and you've got sort of 1.2%. I mean, every death is sad, but once you're into your 80s and 90s, it's sad, but it's in a sense it's not a tragedy like if it's someone in their 20s, for example. But I think those numbers are extraordinary. Why is it that we never hear those numbers from our NHS leaders, from government ministers, to give people reassurance rather than to scare the living daylights out of people?
So look, I think you make a very good point. You talked about the language there. You talked about the use of the word tragedy. And you're absolutely right to say that every death is a sadness because there are family involved, there are emotions involved, there are consequences of that. But it's not the same to say that every death is a tragedy. And I'm afraid that some of the language that's been used throughout this pandemic has been sensationalist. It's been without context. It's been lacking proportion. And the question you raise, I think, is a really good one. Why is the data not being looked at in its entirety? Why are people not being given the reassurances that they should be, that whilst COVID is prevalent, it's not causing the same level of damage that it was at the beginning of this pandemic? So we are seeing people in our care homes infected. We are seeing outbreaks. We're not seeing people become seriously ill, and we're not seeing people dying. And if I give you an anecdote, which perhaps just gives you some further context, we look at our COVID figures on a daily basis. We measure the number of people who are dying. We need to do that as part of our reporting for the NHS. And I received an email yesterday which said, we're sad to report that one person in the care home business has died from COVID. This person was double vaccinated and they had no underlying health conditions. Now, if I present that information to you, that sounds distressing. The implications that COVID has robbed this person many good years of life. The reality is, sadly, that the underlying health condition was that this person was 103. So we need to think about this in context, because that person was at end of life. They were dying, their body was breaking down, and something was going to kill them. So is COVID in that context the killer, or is it simply the thing that ultimately caused them to pass away? And I don't want to feel or appear dispassionate talking about death, because that's not the point here. But my point really is that we need to look at this with real context to understand, what the implications are of the decisions that we're making at government and the impact on people's lives.
As you say, it's the context, and it's about having the leadership to give people the full picture. And these numbers, I think, are fascinating from you. And can you just help me? Obviously, the impact on staff morale. So you've lost, just doing the maths, about 200 staff. And would most of those, do you know, would they have left the industry altogether, or might they have gone into the NHS? Do you know?
Well, so it's a combination. So there was a flight to the NHS because, of course, the vaccine wasn't mandated for the NHS at that point. It has now been mandated, albeit it's not happening until April. So we saw a significant flight of people into the NHS, which is ironic, isn't it? Because if I have people in my care home who become seriously ill and have to go into hospital, they come out of a fully vaccinated environment and they go into the NHS, where they're treated by people who are unvaccinated. In some cases, the very people who were treating them the week previously in the care home. So there's a complete lack of logic between those two things. And then we've also lost people to other parts of the economy as those have opened up. So our laundry staff, our catering staff have moved into retail and hospitality.
And can you just help me? We've got a little bit of time left, Jeremy. We've now got more restrictions, haven't we, coming in or just come in on visitor numbers into care homes. What's the latest on that?
Well, look, Richard, I think that's the real tragedy of this, because as I said right at the top of this interview, I've got two roles. One is to keep residents safe, but the second is to provide them with quality of life. And you're quite right. Last night, the government announced that they were going to restrict the number of visitors. So each resident can now have 3 visitors and an essential carer only. And if you went to those people, and I've done this, by the way, if you went to those people and you asked them whether they could make a choice, which would you rather have? Absolute security, except, of course, you don't have absolute security because the virus will continue to transmit, or a quality of life, they would absolutely opt for the latter. And you've got to remember that the average length of stay in one of our care homes is 18 months. So 2/3 of the people in our care home will probably see this Christmas as their last Christmas. And we have to give those people, at a human level, the very best quality of life that we can. So by applying further restrictions, we deny them the opportunity to do that. By applying those restrictions, we deny them the chance to live those final months of their life in the way that they want to live them. And that's the important thing. You know, these people spent a very large part of their lives fighting for the liberties that we are now taking away from them, because we've decided, or somebody in government has decided, that they are no longer capable of making decisions for themselves. And at a human and a moral level, I think that's absolutely unacceptable.
And there seems to be almost no discussion about that in the mainstream media. I'm delighted that we've been able to address that, because it is, as you say, if this is someone's likely to be their last Christmas, surely they want as many people around them as possible, if they're of a certain age. And it just seems to me so wrong, so lacking in humanity, in thought, in basic understanding, people's sort of basic rights. I just find it extraordinary that the leaders of the NHS, the leaders in the Department of Health could be just so lacking in that real compassion, and that presumably has a real impact on the mood of your staff as well, Jeremy. I mean, it must be really tough for them.
Of course it does. So they've spent 2 years being coerced and legislated against and done to. And the messaging in the media in many cases has been really negative. You know, we went from clapping for carers on a Thursday to sacking carers for not taking the jab. And if what we want to do is encourage people into the sector, we need to make the sector the most attractive place that we possibly can to work in. And all of the messaging that's coming from government is completely the opposite of that at the moment. And that's a real problem. And if I think about some of the comments that the Health Secretary, for example, made recently, he went on radio and he said, anybody who doesn't take the vaccine in social care doesn't deserve a job in care. Now, with respect to the Health Secretary, he's talking about a group of people who in March and April of 2020 willingly went into work and put themselves at what was then immeasurable risk, because we didn't know what this virus could do. So it's not stretching the point to say that they went into work and they risked their lives, and yet then turn around to them and sack them because they're hesitant about taking a jab, when the health outcome for my residents, and this is important, the health outcome for residents will be no better improved by the 5% of my workforce who weren't vaccinated being vaccinated, is disgraceful.
No, I think that message comes through loud and clear. Jeremy, we could talk for ages on this. I'm so grateful. We'll get you back on because that's absolutely fascinating. That was Jeremy Richardson, the Chief Executive of Four Seasons Healthcare, talking about the impact on his staff, talking about actually the very small number, just 1.2% of his residents who've died with COVID since March this year. I cannot understand why our leaders, our ministers in the health department don't set out the real numbers to give people confidence and self-belief. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We'll be taking the calls coming up straight after the break. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's 11:16, and it is, of course, the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
They can take away your opinion. They can't take away your freedom of speech.
100% more beef.
Smart people, smart thinking.
We say what you think.
Talk Radio, the home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 11:20, and that last interview, an exclusive first here on Talk Radio with Jeremy Richardson of Four Seasons Healthcare, has got people talking and ringing and tweeting. Here we've got one that says, Jeremy Richardson for Prime Minister cheering at the radio. That was from Digitalis. Mark says, gripping interview with the guy from Four Seasons Healthcare, completely different, unheard of voice from the sector, and some sobering info. We need to wake up. And another one here, Rosie says, Jeremy Richardson was brilliant. What he said about revealing about the true statistics of deaths in care homes. And yes, every death is sad, but is it really a tragedy at the age of 103? And yet these ministers want to stop people being able to go and see their loved ones, what could potentially be the last Christmas. Well, on the calls, we're going to take some calls now because the switchboard is rammed. We're going to Shane to talk about the care home staff. Shane, a very good morning to you.
Oh, hi, Richard. Good morning. I speak to you from the Whitstable coastline, which just at this moment in time feels quite normal. The sunshine is out, people are walking their dogs, and I'm pleased to say that very few have got masks on. I was interested listening to you talk to the chap from the Four Seasons. I recently wrote to Roger Gale, Sir Roger Gale, my local MP, just to ask how he would be voting next week for the further restrictions. And typically he's responded with, yes, of course I shall be voting for the new restrictions. I'm following the science. And this is the same guy, Richard, let me remind you, who was on Talk Radio about 6-8 weeks ago saying he fully supported the measures that were being brought in that would end up sacking our social care staff and ultimately next year or NHS staff at a time when we need them more than ever. All I was going to say, Richard, I think you're doing a great job, both on the radio, Talk Radio do a fabulous job, and politically, the whinge, I hope, is at your back, Richard, because we're going to need you, people like you, more than ever to stop what it seems like a juggernaut going in the wrong direction. Please invite Roger Gale to come on and talk against the guy that you had on from the Four Seasons and try and make this MP see sense. He wants more lockdowns, more restrictions. He's signed up to the idea of vaccine passports. This is a road that unless the people say no, enough is enough, it's just going to continue.
Well,
there's no end in sight.
It's a very slippery slope, and at the moment I can't. Well, the only end I can see, Shane, is as I talked about earlier on my Sunday sermon, which is the end actually is having confidence in the treatments. And when we all know the names of the treatments that have either been approved or will come through and be approved, that's when we have the confidence to live with this. But at the moment, we're 120 million jabs in.
There, you know, I've got 3 jabs inside me. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. If the government say I should have vaccines, then of course I'm going to have the vaccines. But for those that don't want the vaccines, that don't feel comfortable for whatever reason, we shouldn't be coercing or God forbid, enforcing.
Shane,
we should be now let alone to get on with our lives. We've taken the necessary steps. We should be given the right to wear a mask or not to wear a mask, depending on how we feel. We must learn to live with COVID.
But how often we just don't hear that expression enough from our ministers and our Prime Minister. Shane, thank you very much. I've just got to take another call here from, I think we've got Stephen in London to talk about vaccine passport. Stephen, a very good morning. Hopefully you're there.
Good morning, Richard. Yeah, I'm not for mandatory vaccines or IDs. My main problem, I think it should be up to individual businesses whether they want to allow unvaccinated people in their business. My view is that a large problem of the low vaccination or people not taking the vaccination is because we have a socialist healthcare system. If we had a private healthcare system, then people who chose not to get vaccinated would have to pay higher premiums because their risk of going to hospital would be greater. So they'd have a financial incentive to get the vaccine. At the moment, the government's asking the vaccinated to pay for the extra healthcare of the non-vaccinated.
I'm just trying to work that out in my mind. I mean, we essentially we all pay for our health, but we just pay it through our taxes, so that everything is free at the point of delivery. But I mean, I think almost all nations around the world, vaccines are free. Are you suggesting anything other than that?
I'm saying because we have a socialist healthcare system, if I get the vaccine, my risk of going to hospital is quite low. Now people who choose not to get the vaccine will have to go. Well, more likely to go to hospital. So they're going to cost the taxpayer more. So if we had a private healthcare system, though, everyone would pay what they wanted to. If they chose not to get the vaccine, they'd have to pay a higher premium because they'd have to.
But Stephen, in a sense, that's never going to happen. But are you essentially? I think what you're in effect saying is that if you are unvaccinated and you go to hospital with COVID, then you should be charged some form of additional fee. But surely that's a bit like saying, well, if you play football on a Sunday morning and sadly you break your leg, well, you knew it was a bit more dangerous than staying at home tucked up under the duvet in bed, and therefore you should pay a fine because you played football and had your leg broken and consumed some NHS resources. It's the same debate, isn't it?
It's exactly the same. Yes, if you play football and take risks, then you should have to pay more for your healthcare, and that's what would happen in a private healthcare system at the moment, because you have a socialist healthcare system. The people who don't take risks, don't smoke, don't do dangerous sports, are subsidising extra healthcare for the people who do take those risks.
I think what you're essentially saying, Stephen, is basically if you want to pay less for your health, then you've got to stay in your bedroom. I'm not sure that's much fun to me, but Stephen, thank you for that thought. Interesting context. I don't agree. I think it's great that we have health, which is healthcare that's free at the point of delivery, and that essentially everybody knows they've paid for their healthcare, but therefore we're free to choose. And whether you choose to play football, whether you choose to be vaccinated or unvaccinated, or choose to go mountaineering, or choose to go smoking, in a sense, that is your freedom, that is your right. Some things are more dangerous than others, but you go into it with a heads up, eyes wide open, you know the risks involved. I think we've just got time for Lenny on the line from Ashford. Lenny, very good morning. You've got some views on Boris, have you, Lenny?
Yes, I have. Now, I'm no fan of Boris at all, but I would like to see him stay as Prime Minister, because with him as Prime Minister, we've got a Labour Party that are equally as useless. So I feel that if we had a coalition government at the next election, that would do the country better than one of them in charge.
Right, okay. So you sort of you're not a fan of Boris, but you want him to stay a bit longer. I
do. But sorry.
Is there anybody else that you think would do a better job in the Tory party, or do you think that he's basically the best there is?
No, I don't think he's the best there is, but there's no one there. I've been a Conservative all my life, but I haven't voted for many years because I cannot believe a word they say, and what they say doesn't mean anything. So you cannot put my vote. I would only vote for somebody if I thought they was going to be good for the country.
Yes, I mean, actually, I think it's really important to vote personally. Of course, it's a free choice, but in a sense, it means that you're sort of invested in what goes on, and so that's why I always encourage people when I'm campaigning to vote. But essentially, it feels to me that Boris is under real threat at the moment. Lenny, do you think he survives? Do you think he survives until the middle of next year?
I think he will because, I mean, what I've just repeated is that the Tory party are I said on the radio the other day, they treat us with contempt, and they should change their name from the Conservatives to the Contemptibles.
Well, yeah. So I've changed it, Lenny, to the Con-Socialists, because they're the party of high tax, high regulation.
Well, that's a very good saying.
And nanny state. Lenny, I'm going to have to go to the news. So thank you very much for your thoughts about Boris. There we are. We've got some callers' views. Coming up after the news, we're going to be talking to Sophie Corcoran, student at Durham University, about what on earth is going on. Snowflakes, students, academics. Don't miss it. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. The Christmas chaos continues as a picture emerges of the Prime Minister at a Downing Street quiz last year. And legendary Lewis Hamilton is on the verge of becoming Formula One's most successful driver ever. The Prime Minister is facing further questions about his leadership today after yet more claims emerged of potential rule-breaking at Downing Street last year. This time, a photograph of Boris Johnson sitting close to two colleagues during a quiz has been published by the Sunday Mirror. Household mixing was banned in London at the time. Downing Street says the Prime Minister briefly took part virtually to thank the staff for their hard work during the pandemic. A cabinet minister has confirmed that cases of the Omicron variant are now being treated in hospitals. Nadeem Zahawi says we're in a race to get all adults who are eligible for boosters protected as quickly as possible. It comes as people over the age of 30 in England are invited to book their third dose on Monday. The American president has blamed climate change for one of the largest tornado outbreaks in US history, which killed almost 100 people. The storm swept across several states, causing devastation in Kentucky and Illinois. Some meteorologists have been left shocked by the disaster.
I was watching the radar last night and I was saying, wait a second, this is December. How is this happening in December? This is the kind of thing you would only see at the height of the season, March, April, May. I'd never seen anything like this this time of year.
And Britain's Lewis Hamilton will start behind title rival Max Verstappen on the grid in today's winner-takes-all Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. A win for Hamilton will mean a record 8th World Championship, which would make him the most successful driver of all time. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
A first magnitude star of common sense.
The Tice Man.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
I'm not sure I can quite cope with the new ident anyway about the Tice Man, but there we go. It's 11:33 here in the second hour of Tice Talk this Sunday morning, and we've had some fantastic calls, we've had some great tweets, we've had some fairly aggressive tweets, but keep them clean, keep them simple. It's a family show, of course. So now we've got to move on to the important topic of free speech. Freedom of speech is a vital right for all of us at all ages of our lives, but in particular, surely, the right to free speech, to be creative, to discuss things, to brainstorm the great ideas, the wacky ideas, the new ideas, the unprintable ideas. Surely, if that's going to be done anywhere, it should be in our universities, in our sort of beacons of academic thinking. But maybe not. If any of you read the Daily Mail, yesterday there was a double-page spread. There's another double-page spread in the same paper, the Mail, on Sunday this morning, about what's gone on in Durham University just last week, when a nice gentleman called Rod Liddle was invited for dinner and asked to say a few words at one of the college dinners up there. And, Durham's it's a great place. And he knew the professor, a gentleman called Tim Luckhurst, who invited him. But it seems that the students didn't really like it. And about 15 to 20 of them stood up and walked out the moment Rod stood up to speak. And then having spoken, and then the college principal, Tim Luckhurst, he reacted quite bluntly. He called the students walking out pathetic. So then that created greater outrage. And now we've got a sort of, it's all really kicked off is the bottom line. And the students have kicked off. Tim Luckhurst, fellow academics and lecturers and fellow professors, they've all kicked off. And it seems they all want him cancelled. They all want him sacked. It's unbelievable. Well, I'm delighted to be joined here in the studio by Sophie Corcoran, who is a student at Durham University and who's trying to sort of rail against this. Sophie, very good morning. Give us a sense of the mood in Durham, of what's going on, because surely free speech is an absolute fundamental right of everybody, but in particular in universities.
The mood is very toxic right now. Obviously, the media involvement has toxified the environment. There is a definite witch hunt against Tim Luckhurst, and they want him gone.
But surely his colleagues in the world of academia, I mean, he's obviously been there, I suspect, for a number of years, many years. Are they not standing up for him? I mean, where's their sense of team spirit, their sense of collegiality?
Oh, there is none. They're all turning against him. From almost the moment that it was seen on social media, we started to receive emails from colleges and academic departments. So obviously the likes of the head of biology, a lot of the academics are over Twitter. I know one of them actually wrote a personal letter to the university basically asking for Tim Luckhurst's head. They want him gone. All of the academics want him gone. The colleges want him gone. The vice principals of South College also want him gone. He hasn't really got any support from students or staff alike.
I mean, it sounds extraordinary. Is it the case that actually the academics themselves, the grown-ups in the room, the adults in the room, so to speak, although obviously everybody's an adult, but other staff, the academics, actually even in that possible worse than the students in trying to have him cancelled?
I think they're all just as bad as each other. Obviously, it started from the students, but the staff are the ones who are sort of giving the students a almost, confirmation of that's what they should be doing, encouragement. And a lot of them actually joined the protest. So if you see some of the photos from the protest, you see people wearing pink hats, and they're UCU hats. So they are the members of staff who are also joining the protest. So a lot of them are really fueling the fire underneath these students and basically encouraging them to go further and further and one of the emails actually said, I know that you're angry, and that if they post harmful things about Tim Luckhurst in their windows, because there's a lot of sign at the windows, that he's not going to take it down. So They're not, I know, I read the bottom of the email, and they're not going to take it down. So they can basically say whatever they like about Tim Luckhurst, and the university are not going to punish the students.
That almost sounds like the university is accepting incitement to hate.
Yes, that's exactly what they're doing, because in their eyes, because it's on the left side of the argument and they're fighting against hate speech, using hate speech, which in my opinion makes no sense, they're fine with it.
Goodness me. And you weren't at the event, were you?
I was not at the event, no, I was back down here.
But have you spoken to people who were at the event itself?
Oh, my best friend goes to South College, so I get all of the
intel.
I get all of the emails, all of the inside information, so it's good.
And so what's the prospect of a counter campaign, a support Tim Luckhurst campaign being launched and becoming a thing in its own right?
I think very minimal in terms of the university, just because the reason why this campaign was able to gain traction so quickly is because all of the student associations are the ones, and the student union. The student union have been really sneaky in saying that it was just a student-led protest and it was nothing to do with, the students' union of the university. No. The students' union were behind it. They were at the protest. Siobhan Twins, who's the president of the student union, is pushing this. No surprise. She's called Jeremy Corbyn the White King. And so that is why, the Durham People of Colour Association, the Working Class, all of them are rallying together to do this. There's no real opposition to this campaign. So although we get it from the wider media, that's, I think, how we're going to keep tabs on the students.
And is there concern that Tim Luckhurst invited Rod Riddle in the first place, or is it the fact that he called a few grumpy students who walked out pathetic? Or is it something else greater? Is it, for example, that is Tim Luckhurst politically active on the other side of the debate, for example?
I think they're angry at all three of those things. So I've seen a lot of comments from students saying the university should now investigate tweets that Tim Luckhurst has made because they're party political and a principal shouldn't be doing that. They were angry at the fact that he invited Rod Liddle, but the university have thrown him under the bus, but they're the ones who confirmed Rod Liddle's appointment. And obviously a lot of the anger is because of what Rod Liddle said, and then they're now trying to place the blame on Tim Luckhurst because he called them pathetic. But to be honest, they are pathetic. So he was honest about that.
And in terms of free speech, is it true that speakers may now have to essentially submit their speech before they speak?
So a lot of the, idea of the protest, the biggest thing that they want to change is they want to have something called content warning. So not only do the speakers now have to go through the Students' Union and through our Jeremy Corbyn loving Student Union president, they also have to submit what they're saying in their speech, and their speeches effectively have to be vetted before they're allowed to happen, which is a chilling
absolutely
attack.
Extraordinary. I've been lucky enough to be invited to speak at Durham, which I love. It's a great place to speak. In the debating union. So are you saying that might even apply there?
Oh, yes. So everything. So I was going to have a show on the student radio, and I had to submit any guests at all to the Students' Union.
You had to get the guests vetted.
Yep.
And then what they say has to be vetted.
Yep, pretty much. And also not allowed to you're not allowed to say anything against the student union or anything on the student.
So that's the end of any more invites that I'm going to get then. I mean,
pretty much. We're never going to see you on my campus again, I don't think, Richard.
That looks like the end of my Durham University speaking career.
But it's quite astonishing how all of this, effectively, a principal has effectively been sacked. I know he's been suspended, but he's not allowed to do a vast majority
he's been suspended already, has he?
He's been suspended under investigation. He's not allowed to do any, student-facing jobs. He's effectively been sacked in all but name. Because all of this, basically a killing of free speech on my campus has happened because of 300 crybabies out of a university of nearly 20,000 students. So a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of students, in the grand scheme of things, have been able to effectively sack a professor and destroy any attempts of free speech on our campus.
I love that expression. Crybabies, snowflakes, pathetic, wimps. I mean, who knows? Maybe some people will tweet in some other names for them or give us a call, because I just find this extraordinary. And that's a great stat. You said how many? 17,000?
There is only 300 students out of nearly 20,000. There's 19 point something thousand students.
So doing some quick maths, that's about 1.5%, I think I've got that right.
Yep, a tiny minority.
Tiny number of students have essentially completely rewritten the rules about free speech in Durham University. So where are the other thousands of students standing up for free speech? Are they too scared? What's going on?
Yes, I think they're too scared because at the end of the day, the people who are organising these protests are the ones who are in the powerful student positions. So the rest of us don't. And every time I speak about my university, even Kevin, he always says, Sophie, just be careful. And I say, why should I be careful? I shouldn't have to be careful. But that's the problem. A lot of them are scared.
And that is so worrying.
Yeah.
If students, if young people with great ideas, mad ideas, are scared of being able to stand up for free speech so that they can express it, discuss it. I mean, that's how we progress.
Yeah.
When young people challenge, us oldies, that's how we keep making progress. But if you can't discuss stuff, of whatever form in universities, then I mean, it's and Durham of all places. I wish you every success in trying to, trying to sort of get others to join you, to have the courage to speak out. And you yourself facing some grief for speaking out on this?
Oh yeah, of course. I think the second I literally just reported it at face value what it was, and they were so angry that I did that, and I was like, well, I'm sorry, but that's exactly what happened. And then obviously I get shouted at in the streets and things, of course, but it's because I'm a little bit more prolific than the others. But yeah, there's no chance, absolutely no chance. And it's so concerning because that's exactly what university is supposed to do. That's the whole purpose of university, is to, explore new ideas. That's what university is made for.
It's made for, and the whole point is surely to encourage people how to think.
Not what to think, but that's exactly what's happening. And it's the professors that are leading it. I mean, we've had professors say to me in mine that, if you're a straight white man, your life is going to be hell under the Tories. And I study business. What's that got to do with business?
It sounds horrendous. Sophie, well, I hope you don't get too much grief for coming onto this show and telling the clear, unvarnished truth about what's going on at Durham University, because that sounds horrific. I'm disappointed, clearly, that's the end of my Durham University speaking career. Who knows? If I did get invited, I'll tell you what to do. I think I would submit a fake speech, and then I would give something completely different and see how quickly I got terminated and how quickly I got cancelled. Sophie Corcoran, thank you so much. Great to have you here in the studio. Absolutely fascinating, as well as truly, truly terrifying. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's 11:45. Keep the calls coming up. Keep the tweets coming in. We've got plenty of time for that. And then at the top of the hour, we're going to be talking Russia. We're going to be talking Ukraine. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Bish Bosh Berserk. Full contact, common sense conversation.
Lively debate, now with 0% drift and dither.
Always read the label. A roadmap for the future of debate. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 11:48. The sky is getting darker, but we've just had a fascinating, great, extraordinary interview with Sophie Corcoran that I think you have enjoyed. We've got a tweet in here from Lucy, says, please pass on 3 cheers to Sophie. I think all speakers should boycott universities until they come to their senses. Another one from Mrs. O says, Sophie Corcoran is awesome. And another one here from Rob, who says what does Rob say? He says, what an intelligent young woman. Pity all our universities aren't full of people like her instead of left-leaning snowflakes. Look, we want diversity of political views and things, but that really was quite extraordinary. The fear that is going through our universities amongst the students about standing up, I just find that utterly extraordinary. And I've spoken at Durham University. Truly terrifying. Give me a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts on that. Meanwhile, we've got Jim from Gateshead. Jim, good morning. What are your thoughts?
Pleasure to speak to you. It's just basically touching on the university thing. The problem we've got is with this COVID nonsense is we've got two generations who have been indoctrinated to believe the state knows best. On Boris Johnson, he actually gives us anxiety. You know, the whole political system is giving us anxiety because the thing about it is it's not just the COVID and his lies and persistent lies and he's not being able to admit the truth. It's everything that he's doing. We didn't vote for a green agenda. We didn't vote to waste all our money on things that we don't need or don't want. What we need is infrastructure. We need to produce our own gas. We need to produce one coal for that matter instead of product from around the world, which is trapping people into poverty.
Well, that's right.
They're as bad as a left-wing Labour Party.
Well, it's interesting, Jim, because actually having been knocking on thousands of doors in Bexley in South London just over the recent weeks, that's the message that I was hearing. People want to save their boilers, they want to keep their boilers, and people are very patriotic about our energy. People want to buy British gas, they don't want to buy Putin's gas or Macron's electricity. And people seem, I agree, we should be using our own shale gas, and it reduces our exposure to the world markets. No question. It sounds like you're hearing that in the north as well, Jim.
Oh, without a shadow. I mean, I know coal's a dirty carbon, but we've got carbon capture. It works better than the electric cars and everything like that. I can see the electric cars coming where it will go back to the 50s and 60s where only people that can afford it will be able to drive to get the A to B. And if they don't put the infrastructure in place, we'll just have people trapped in their own little bubble again.
Well,
we're going backwards.
Well, I mean, I'm a great fan of reducing emissions. We've got to put the whole thing in context there. We all want to do our bit. We all like cleaner air. But I think it's really important that we do the right bit. I've got an electric car. I'm trying to do my bit, as has my deputy leader. My concern, Jim, is that what Boris is doing with his energy policies, he's actually doing the wrong bit, Jim, at the wrong price, and that it's the least well off and the lowest paid who are going to suffer the most from those wrong policies.
Yes, they will pay the price, but you do your bit and that and all the rest of it, electric cars, but it's the infrastructure and where's the lithium going to come from? That's the bigger picture. But as far as I go, as a working man, very proud to be a working man as well, is like all our furniture is second hand, and if somebody wants it for the next generation, because we're bought expensive and we're bought second hand, it'll last 2 lifetimes. Consumerism is a problem, buying cheap chat from China and throwing it away when it breaks instead of getting things fixed. There's more than one way to save emissions, is to get things made back in this country so we don't have the emissions of it travelling over the world and make it the last, instead of having a 5-year lifespan where everybody has to go out and buy another one.
You're quite right, isn't it? This sort of throwaway society, and of course, it's actually very often some of the eco-zealots and the eco-bullies who are the ones who are throwing away clothes and stuff after using it just 1 or 2 times. Jim, thank you so much for your thoughts there. That was Jim from Gateshead. We're going to go to another call in a second, but just another tweet interesting coming in here from Bot. Durham University is publicly funded. Time the government stopped giving them taxpayers' money. That's an interesting point. Of course, you've got student loans and things, but they do also get huge research grants from the government. Another one here, Steve, he explains, what sort of wayward toilet is Durham University? Who'd possibly pay to go there? Well, I think Durham University, maybe I'll invite them on the show to explain themselves. Team, we might organise that for next week. Let's see whether or not they accept the invitation or whether or not they haven't got the guts and the courage to do that. I think we've got Alex on the line as well. Alex, very good morning to you. Are you calling from Vancouver?
I am indeed, Richard. It's the middle of the morning here, but I can't sleep.
That's unbelievable. Well, it's great that you're listening to Tice Talk. What's going on in Vancouver? Give us some global perspective about the madness.
Yeah, sure, Richard. So in Canada, the health measures have evolved to the provinces, much like the UK. So it does vary. But in Vancouver, as a unvaccinated person, I can't go snowboarding, which is kind of strange because that's mainly outside, well, completely outside. I can go to the supermarket, but I can't go to a restaurant or a cinema or a bar or a pub. In Ontario, which is the most populous province where the city of Toronto is, they've just mandated vaccine passports for children. So if you're a child over 12 years old, you now need a vaccine passport to play team sports.
Hang on, just say that again. Alex, you're telling me that children above the age of 12 have to have vaccine passports, otherwise they can't play sport?
That's correct, yeah. So that was announced yesterday. And also vaccine passports in Ontario, again, the province where Toronto is in, the most populous city. They've actually extended vaccine passports indefinitely. the provincial premier, Doug Ford, had promised a few months ago that they were going to be phased out in January, but now there's no end date. So in New Brunswick, so the province of New Brunswick, which is on the east coast, you now have to check whether your local supermarket requires vaccine passports in order to enter the supermarket. So it's all a bit kind of nightmarish. It's very dystopian.
That sounds, Alex, that sounds far worse than where things are here. But we're just about to have vaccine passports introduced on a sort of, well, let's call it mild basis in certain venues. But you've gone the full hog there. That's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think, Richard, all of the focus has been on Australia because the Australians have actually stood up and protested, and it's been on television. It's got a lot of media coverage. In Canada, people haven't really reacted, so there hasn't really been much focus on it. But I think if the Tory party allow these passports to be introduced, you're not going to get rid of them. It's going to be a ratchet effect. And I think this Plan B is the thin end of a wedge because most of the Canadian provinces started with relatively, sparse restrictions. And, you only need a vaccine passport for large sporting events. And then month after month, the ratchet...
It's relentless. It's a relentless thin end of the wedge. My jaw is literally dropping...
I think that's part of the plan.
Alex, thank you so much for that thoughts. Please do keep listening to Tice Talk. Keep giving us the international perspective. That's extraordinary. Unless I've missed it, there's been almost no reporting of what's going on in Canada. As Alex said, there's been so much chat about what's going on in Australia. But let's just clarify that children above the age of 12 in Canada, certainly in Vancouver, they have to have a vaccine passport in order to play sport in their schools. We need to wake up, folks. Because if that's happening in Canada, sure as eggs are eggs, that's a Commonwealth country. That's the sort of thing that could be coming here unless we stand up and we campaign and we battle against it. Quite unbelievable what's going on. I'm truly shocked at the moment. Lots of tweets coming in supporting Sophie, doing a fantastic job with that interview, courageously speaking out, and lots of people basically saying that we should stop funding Durham University with any government grants, that people shouldn't be given student loans. Some quite radical stuff. But really and truly, the right to free speech and the right to freedom of movement is so vital and is being threatened in so many ways. I'm literally going to have to take a breather because some of this stuff is quite shocking. You're listening to Tice Talk. We're approaching the top of the hour. It is, of course, Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 12, I'm Nadira Tudor. The Christmas chaos continues as a picture emerges of the Prime Minister at a Downing Street quiz last year. President Biden blames climate change for the tornadoes that have killed almost 100 people. And legendary Lewis Hamilton is on the verge of becoming Formula One's most successful driver ever. Further questions about the Prime Minister's leadership today as more claims emerge of potential rule-breaking at Downing Street last year. This time, a photograph of Boris Johnson sitting close to two colleagues during a quiz has been published by the Sunday Mirror. Household mixing was banned in London at the time. Downing Street says the Prime Minister briefly took part virtually to thank the staff for their hard work during the pandemic. It comes ahead of a crucial vote next week on Boris Johnson's new COVID restrictions to tackle the Omicron variant. Steve Baker is one of 60 Tory MPs who say they'll vote against the Plan B measures.
I'm very clear I'm not going down the road of trying to remove a Prime Minister. I've been down that road before. I'm not doing it again. But what I cannot do is stand by and allow us to get into a position where ministers routinely impose extremely costly and minute interventions on all our lives at the drop of a hat.
A cabinet minister has confirmed that cases of the Omicron variant are now being treated in hospitals. Nadeem Zahawi says we're in a race to get all adults who are eligible for boosters protected as quickly as possible. It comes as people over the age of 30 in England are invited to book their third dose on Monday. The American president has blamed climate change for one of the largest tornado outbreaks in US history, which killed almost 100 people. The storm swept across several states, causing devastation in Kentucky and Illinois. Tennessee, Arkansas and Missouri were also affected. Some meteorologists have been left shocked by the disaster.
I was watching the radar last night and I was saying, wait a second, this is December. How is this happening in December? This is the kind of thing you would only see at the height of the season, March, April, May. I'd never seen anything like this this time of year.
Police are searching for Petra Srinkova, a 32-year-old nursing assistant who was last seen on a bus in South London on the 28th of November. Labour MP Harriet Harman has called for the public's help to find her as she and local councillors put up missing person posters. And Britain's Lewis Hamilton will start behind title rival Max Verstappen on the grid in today's winner-takes-all Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. The Dutch driver was at 0.3 seconds quicker than Hamilton in yesterday's qualifying. A win for Hamilton will mean a record 8th World Championship, which would make him the most successful driver of all time. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV, more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Morning Talk.
Sunday Talk.
Talk Radio.
Richard Tice.
Powered by Debate. Sunday morning with the Tice Man. Richard Tice. The heart of a common sense Sunday.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 12:04. There is a little bit of blue sky trying to peep through, but it's been quite challenging this morning. We've been everywhere, haven't we? We've been talking about vaccine passports, the pros and the cons. We've been to Durham University. We've been talking about care homes. But now, folks, it's time to think international. Of course, just before the break, we were talking to Alex from Vancouver. But now we need to go over to talk about and understand what's going on in Ukraine and in Russia, because there's some very serious massing of Russian troops just the other side of the Ukrainian border. And it's quite clear that once again, the strong man, Vladimir Putin, has got a big agenda, a big plan. He's trying to achieve something, and the question is what? And I'm delighted to be joined now by Michael Binion, OBE, Foreign Affairs Correspondent for The Times, to just explore what's going on and what's the impact on us here at home, because this is really, really significant, strategically important geopolitical stuff. Michael, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us in the studio. So Putin's massing troops, I mean, potentially tens and tens of thousands of troops on the border. What do you think his real objective is? I can't believe he wants war, so he obviously wants something else. What is that?
Well, it's brinkmanship, I think. He wants leverage. He wants to get the West to understand he's very serious that Ukraine must never be admitted into NATO. It's a pretty stupid demand because actually, although technically the invitation is open to Ukraine, most of NATO has no wish to bring Ukraine into its organisation anyway. It's recognised that this wouldn't help Ukraine, it wouldn't guarantee the security. Putin wants it written down in a kind of new treaty, black and white. NATO stops at the Ukrainian border. He also, of course, wants to pressure the West over gas supplies, over generally Western pressure on Russia, over sanctions, over all the other things that the Russians are smarting at. And he's feeling that, a bit of brinkmanship would help. And of course, brinkmanship only works if it looks as though you really are serious and will go in.
But equally, of course, it works the other way in terms of how the West may respond and what he thinks the West would do. It feels a bit like the brinkmanship between China and Taiwan, where the US has committed, by an act of Congress, to give Taiwan the necessary equipment, but it never committed to give actual defensive troops on the ground. And I think it's maybe a bit similar here, where Ukraine may be given lots of equipment by the West, by NATO, by the US, but the question is whether or not troops would go in from NATO in the event of an incursion into Ukraine by Russia.
I think that's an absolutely fair comparison. I think it's very similar. I know you're right. There's plenty of equipment that may go to Ukraine. Of course, that would annoy the Russians anyway, because the Ukrainians have been training pretty hard for this possibility. It's the second time in a year that Putin's massed troops on the border. He did it earlier in the year also, and then stood them down. So the Ukrainians have been training, but they're not going to have Western soldiers coming onto their soil to help them.
And of course, the truth is, their troops, even with equipment, they wouldn't be able to hold the Russians back for very long, would they? I mean, is it weeks? Is it months?
Hard to say. It depends what kind of casualties they could or would inflict on the Russians. It depends whether this is a full-scale bloody war, in which case it could be pretty awful, pretty chaotic. I mean, one of the worst outbreaks of violence in Europe since the Second World War, if that happens.
If that happened. But maybe it is just brinkmanship. So let's just look at this brinkmanship. So Putin doesn't want, he wants a firm cast-iron guarantee not to join NATO. But let's talk about gas, because at the moment, and this is unbelievable, but about 50% of Europe's gas comes from Russia. And at the moment, almost all of it, I think, comes through a pipeline through Ukraine, and Ukraine gets transit fees, which is obviously very important for the Ukraine economy. And there's been a new pipeline that's been built, and I think I understand is literally ready to open, called Nord Stream 2, which avoids Ukraine, goes straight into Germany. Russia's obviously very keen to get that open, but actually at the moment, that hasn't been certificated. Germany hasn't approved it, and the US and the UK is putting real pressure on Germany not to open Nord Stream 2. So how does this play into this?
Well, it's a very tricky one. It's tricky for the new German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, because he and his new government have actually taken a fairly tough line towards Russia. And they are suggesting they won't open Nord Stream 2, but it leaves Germany extremely vulnerable. They have no nuclear power stations. They closed those down.
That wasn't very smart, was it?
No, that was a thing they did a few years ago, green agenda and all that. They've also promised to phase out coal. They don't have any natural gas of their own, so they are pretty dependent. And so is the rest of Europe. They are trying to diversify to get liquid gas from the Gulf or from Qatar or somewhere around there. But as you say, the immediate supply is right on their doorstep from Russia. And the Russians are keen to sell, and many of the Europeans are still keen to buy. But of course, it does put Putin in a strong position to bargain over what's the price for the gas.
Well, that's it. And then, of course, that impacts on us. And I'm going to be talking later in the hour, actually, about the potential impact on energy prices. We're much less exposed, but we're still exposed to Putin's gas. But for Europe, it seems to me they really are. Putin could essentially, he's got them in a complete stranglehold. I mean, where else do they go rapidly for gas if Putin restricts the supply through Ukraine?
Yeah, difficult to say. I mean, there's nowhere straight away. They could step up. There's shipments of liquid gas from the Gulf. I mean, that's already quite high, and there's plenty. And actually, Britain does quite well out of that. But continental Europe, they're not really geared up for that so much, and it will be difficult for them. They do depend, almost 50% on Russian gas. I don't think the Russians are likely to cut it off, but even if they restrict, even if they don't open Nord Stream 2, the new gas pipeline, if the Russians get really serious about Ukraine and switch off the supply through Ukraine, then the Europeans really are at the mercy. They're at the mercy.
Completely at the mercy. So, of course, what will happen is there'll be some technical problems, won't there?
Yeah, that's what they thought.
You know, and
it's happened before.
It's happened before. So that boosts the price.
Yeah.
That's good for the Russian economy, which, frankly, is clearly struggling. But it sounds to me as though what he really wants, his real end game, is to get Nord Stream 2 open so that he can then financially damage Ukraine even further.
Yes, I think it's a double strategy. One is using gas as leverage, partly in his own global strategy, and the other one is to make sure the Ukrainians really do take note of what Russia's doing and listen and obey, and don't drift off into a sort of closer alliance, either formal or informal, with the West, which Russia would see as an absolute threat to their own interests.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying, actually. And of course, when Russia took over the Crimea, they did it in a very sort of subversive way, didn't they? Using soldiers in different uniforms, with equipment, with no markings on, and they just sort of claimed it was sort of militia groups. It was all very subversive, and maybe he might even do that again in East Ukraine.
Well, he might. I think Crimea is a bit of a special case. It's not politically correct to say so, but frankly, most Western governments are not too bothered about Crimea because they recognise, first of all, throughout history, this has always been part of Russia. Secondly, it is majority Russian-speaking. And thirdly, it was done semi-peacefully, as it were. It was a smart, underhand move, but so technically it was illegal. But it's quite a different matter when they're trying to separate parts of mainland Ukraine, the eastern two provinces, the breakaway provinces, and particularly as they have used real military force, and 14,000 people have already been killed.
This is the thing that I hadn't quite appreciated until this weekend, that 14,000 people have been killed in the last few years in a sort of low-level skirmishes, military activity. It is a lot.
It's a bit like the First World War. They've dug trenches all along the front line, and every so often they pop up, and have a go at each other in their trenches, and every so often they try to sort of push forward and get repulsed. It's very like a sort of stalemate in the First World War, but it is taking casualties.
Yeah, clearly, and in a sense, that must be so debilitating for the Ukrainians. It's obviously very deliberate by Putin, and it's like he's continually prodding. Let's just quickly talk about, before we finish, the sanctions, other sanctions available. There's talk, Liz Truss is talking a sort of a strong game, maybe as part of her leadership campaign ambitions, about sanctions, possibly restricting Russia's ability to use the clearing bank system, which would be significant. I wonder whether actually we could also suggest, well, after a certain period of time, we're not going to buy your gas. We're just going to reduce our reliance on you. But I guess that's a medium-term sanctions strategy.
Yes, well, they've already talked about that, and I think the Russians realise that may be a possibility, but not for a while. To find alternatives to gas straight away is difficult and costly. Yes, financial sanctions would be very difficult and damaging to Russia, particularly if they can't use the clearing banks. It's still part of the global trading system and needs to be able to trade properly. So real sanctions would be very damaging. But of course, smaller sanctions, Russians are already under a lot of sanctions and have been for some years. And in fact, it hasn't particularly affected their economy. They're not doing well, but they're not doing catastrophically.
Because there are some corporate sanctions and some personal sanctions in place, aren't there, on certain individuals?
Yeah.
But those are not really cutting the mustard in terms of changing his strategic thinking, are they?
No. To some extent, that sort of thing just improves his own ability to rally the country around him, saying, look, we're under attack from the rest, our enemies are gathering against us, they're trying to hurt us, stick with me and I'm going to be a tough guy to see you through.
Yeah, and it's, of course, the Russian people, they like a strong, tough, powerful president. to boost their interests on the world stage.
Well, the other thing is, this is partly a diversion because things are not going very well at home. Putin is not very popular now. There's a lot of grumbling. A lot of young people are very fed up. They want to emigrate. They feel there are no jobs. And the corruption has reached a terrible level. Repression has started, even just waving a flag or something or, talking out of turn can lead to the old kind of Soviet restrictions, arrests and repression. And this is really putting pressure on the Kremlin. And Putin is not doing very well. And it's the old tactic. If things are not going very well at home,
make a noise internationally.
Make a noise abroad to show
absolutely.
that your country's under threat.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure that it will work the second time.
Well, but I think from the West point of view, we've got to make it very clear that we're deadly serious about some really effective sanctions so that he's made to think twice. Because if we cave in and allowed Nord Stream 2 pipeline to be opened, he's just going to carry on.
Well, yes. I mean, that's what President Biden told him. I mean, they had a face-to-face meeting, which went on for some time. And they did say that, we could make things very difficult. I mean, it's good that they talked. I mean, we do need still to talk to Russia on a whole range of things, not just all the, the Ukraine and all that. We need to talk to them about climate change, about nuclear threats, about, big things that affect the whole world.
Got to maintain a dialogue.
We've got to keep a dialogue open, yes, and therefore we mustn't push them actually to the brink, and they mustn't push us. No. But it's got to be. We've got to be a face-saving way of drawing this down a bit.
It feels high-level brinkmanship. Michael Binion, thank you so much indeed for those thoughts. Fascinating. We're going to have a break, then keep the calls coming in, and at 12:30 we're going to be talking to Rupert Darwell about the impact on UK energy prices from what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's 12:17. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Accept no substitutes.
Access all arguments.
The UK's official opinion exchange.
Free Speech Radio.
Shut up and listen.
We're on your side.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. Good afternoon, it's 12:20 and we've just been talking about the threat to Ukraine being invaded by Russia. That was with Michael Binion, the Times correspondent. Fascinating stuff. The level of brinkmanship being employed and deployed by Putin and how the West responds and the threats. In a sense, the big threat I worry about is energy prices, what that does to gas prices. We'll be talking later in the show to Rupert Darwall about that. The tweets coming in particular about what's going on in Canada after that call from Alex from Vancouver. Someone else here tells me I need to get a Canadian lawyer on church pastors have been jailed for holding services in Canada. We need to find out more of what's going on that because some of this stuff is truly terrifying. Lots of people supportive of Sophie Corcoran. One here from Dowit saying it's a shame the professor lost his job over a list of opinions from Rod Liddell. It was not a lecture or a debate. It's just free speech. Extraordinary. Well, let's go to your calls. I think we've got John calling in. We're a great international show. John's calling from France. A very good afternoon to you. How's things in France? Is that more restrictive or less restrictive? What are your thoughts, John?
We do have passports here, Richard, and occasionally you have to show them. Go into restaurants, but it's not that bad. It seems to be a hit missing. What I was ringing for was two things. One thing you said about referendums, which I totally agree with, and two, the chap from the care homes. He's at the coalface. He knows his job inside out. What does Sajid Javid and Boris Johnson know about running a care home and making decisions they've made? They know no more about care homes than what's on the other side of the moon.
It is extraordinary. I've spoken to Jeremy on a couple of occasions about it, and exactly as you say, the bosses of these care home organisations, they know what's going on. They should be, in my view, they should be left to run them as they see is in the best interests of their residents and indeed their staff, because essentially it's a massive team effort.
It always bothers me when I see these politicians being sopped around jobs like Gavin Williamson. I won't let him run a work stall, let alone the education department.
I gather he did. He did run a fireplace salesman department, but that's about all. And then someone put him in charge of education, and look where that went.
I mean, I agree with you about referendums. We should on the big things that we all talk about in this country, things like capital punishment, national service. We should have referendums. It's not down to 655 MPs. It should be down to 60 million of us.
Well, on the really big issues of the day, I think the Swiss have got it right. Where actually,
I agree.
You get a certain number of voters if they sign a petition. And it's a decent number, and you set a proper threshold.
Yes.
So in the UK, that might be, let's say, 2-3 million people. But then actually, you have a grown-up debate and a referendum. So interestingly, in Switzerland, of course, John, they actually had a referendum on the Swiss government's COVID restrictions, and actually rejected the government's restrictions, which was, and surprise, surprise, I think I'm right in saying the number was 52-48. That sounds familiar. I'm a great fan of referendums.
The sooner this buffoon Johnson is gone, my choice for Prime Minister would be Ian Duncan Smith. Man who's got discipline, ex-army officer, common sense approach, no nonsense. Johnson wants to get his hair cut, wants to have his suit pressed more than once a year. He's a disgrace as a Prime Minister.
And maybe we'll get him a comb as well, John. Thank you very much for those thoughts. That was John from France, suggesting that Boris Johnson needs a haircut and perhaps a new suit. We've got David from, I think, the Wirral. David, a very good afternoon to you. You got some thoughts on the university wokeness, I think.
Hello, Richard. Thanks for allowing me on. Very briefly, I've got a sort of a plan just to put past you to see what you think. You're an intelligent guy. The situation with universities is they're nothing to do with education. They're all to do with money and status of the people who actually sit within them. And of course, you get certain people, it's the same old path. They go through a particular university of somewhere. They then go into be a graduate in the civil service. They go through the civil service, become a head of department very, very quickly. They get the knighthood because they get given out with the rations. And then when they retire, they automatically, as their alma mater, they go back to the university that they came from as the Vice-Chancellor on another £400,000 a year. So what I think the government should do is actually stop all funding of any universities that do not allow free speech within their campuses. And what that would do, because money talks in universities, is it would ensure that decisions are made based on what's best for the students as opposed to what's best for the student union. And you can see where I'm going with this. It is very much about money in universities, especially the big universities, which are massive money-making enterprises.
They really are. I mean, there's no doubt about it that some of these universities, particularly ever since the cap on student numbers was lifted, they've grown ever bigger. And my concern is actually the quality of the product, the courses they offer and the lecturers they use actually goes down. But it is a fundamental point, isn't it, about free speech? What terrified me about what Sophie was saying was that it's the sort of the everyone's adult, at university, but it's the lecturers, the professors.
Yeah.
Tim Luckhurst's colleagues who he's worked with for ages, they're the ones who are looking to cancel him. I mean, the whole thing does beg a belief, but I think you're right. The government is going to need to, and I think actually, I'm not fully up to speed with this, but I think the government is trying to impose some form of statutory right to free speech. The question is whether that's enough.
And I don't think, in fairness to them, I don't think it is. I think what really would start the ball rolling, and I'm not suggesting we bring back McCarthyism, but they're so infested with Marxists, and they are indoctrination centres. I mean, it's almost like the Soviet Union times, Richard, when you had school number 48. We now have university number 63 because they are just the long march through the institutions, and it's been happening since the late 50s, where people have become Marxists who hate Britain and eventually become senior people within, and you will have met them yourself in your circles. These people who take the Queen shilling very happily, but don't actually love the country that they live in, or they don't actually care about the product that they're selling, which in this case is supposedly higher education.
There's no question. For example, many of the professors and things, the last thing they want to do is actually to teach and to lecture. They want to, they want to be paid for their research. And so what sometimes they do, having taken all the students' money, they either do online lectures, which is increasing in number, or they will literally pay a postgrad £20 an hour to go and deliver a PowerPoint. And then the postgrad says at the end of the lecture to the students, to the undergrads, I'm really sorry, I'm not paid to answer questions. I mean, you couldn't make some of this stuff up.
But ironically, Richard, that's how the civil service works. That's a model. So, I might be the head of a department and I'm Sir David somebody. And what we do is we make sure that it's somebody who's incompetent. So nobody, I worked in the civil service, nobody at that level is competent in the role that they're doing. What they do then is they employ a deputy to that person who actually runs the department and knows what they're doing. And the only thing that happens is if it goes belly up, that Sir David so-and-so takes the rap, but ultimately they get paid off. And that's the civil service model.
Well, yeah,
that's responsible.
David, you're so right. I mean, the whole civil service thing has been shown, in my view, with the COVID crisis, not to be fit for purpose. We've just seen it exposed this week with regard to how the Foreign Office civil servants were performing in regard to Afghanistan. David, thank you so much for those thoughts there on perhaps how we could change or remotivate financially the universities to make sure that free speech is allowed. The terrifying thing that Sophie said was that so many students were fearful of actually standing up for free speech. And she's been very brave, but she will probably get a bunch of grief for having the courage to come here on Talk Radio and to talk about the mood, the atmosphere, what's really going on in Durham University, and therefore presumably other universities around the country. And if you're aware of experiences, whether you're involved in universities or got youngsters, children at universities, let us know. We'll come back to that subject. The time's 12:30. We're approaching the news. You're listening to Tice Talk. Coming up, Rupert Darwell, the direction of energy prices. It's Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. The Christmas chaos continues as a picture emerges of the Prime Minister at a Downing Street quiz last year. And legendary Lewis Hamilton is on the verge of becoming Formula One's most successful driver ever. The Prime Minister is facing further questions about his leadership today after yet more claims emerged of potential rule-breaking at Downing Street last year. This time, a photograph of Boris Johnson sitting close to two colleagues during a quiz has been published by the Sunday Mirror. Household mixing was banned in London at the time. Downing Street says the Prime Minister briefly took part virtually to thank the staff for their hard work during the pandemic. A cabinet minister has confirmed that cases of the Omicron variant are now being treated in hospitals. Nadeem Zahawi says we're in a race to get all adults who are eligible for boosters protected as quickly as possible. It comes as people over the age of 30 in England are invited to book their third dose on Monday. The American president has blamed climate change for one of the largest tornado outbreaks in US history, which killed almost 100 people. The storm swept across several states, causing devastation in Kentucky and Illinois. Some meteorologists have been left shocked by the disaster.
I was watching the radar last night and I was saying, wait a second, this is December. How is this happening in December? This is the kind of thing you would only see at the height of the season, March, April, May. I'd never seen anything like this this time of year.
And Britain's Lewis Hamilton will start behind title rival Max Verstappen on the grid in today's winner-takes-all Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. A win for Hamilton will mean a record 8th World Championship, which would make him the most successful driver of all time. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio. Common Sense Radio for common sense people.
Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 12:33. We've got lots of tweets coming in, lots of calls. We'll get to the calls later. Here's an interesting tweet about the chief exec of Four Seasons Healthcare. Jeremy Richardson was impressive, sensible and compassionate. We need people like him running this country if we're going to prosper. I agree entirely. We've had enough of permanent professional politicians. Well, just earlier in the hour, we were talking to Michael Binion about what's going on in Ukraine, the risk of the Russian troops massing on the border, Putin's real objective. And what I want to look at now is, close to home, what's going to be the impact of that here in the UK for all of us at home. My concern is that Putin is playing a very clever game. He's looking to leverage the price of gas. So let's now talk to Rupert Darwell, who is Senior Fellow of the Real Clear Foundation, author of Green Tyranny, who's an expert in energy, sort of so many things, energy in particular, with regard to the government's net zero plans, or what I call net stupid, but also about the likely impact that what's going on in Russia and what their objectives are may have on our energy prices. Rupert, a very good afternoon. Thanks for joining me on Tice Talk. So obviously you've been looking, I'm sure, closely at what Putin's up to. And you know, from our listeners and viewers closer to home, how may this impact on people over the coming months?
Well, we just heard Liz Truss talking about very severe consequences if Russia invades, or makes an incursion, bigger incursion that is, into Ukraine. But the fact of the matter is that we rely on Russian gas to keep our lights on and keep our homes warm through this winter. So we are in a very, very vulnerable position. And of course, Vladimir Putin understands that full well, that basically he's got us by, he's got energy leverage over us, which we British politicians, European politicians have given him.
And that's truly shocking. Now, Europe is more exposed in terms of the percentage of gas that it buys. I think I'm right in saying that continental Europe buys, give or take, 50% of the gas that it uses from Russia. We buy between 5 and 10%. Is that right?
It's about that. And so we've still got our own natural gas from the North Sea, which incidentally, the government has basically put a moratorium on further exploration for natural gas on the UK continental shelf, which again is completely mad. And we also import a lot from Norway. But you've got to, in effect, because the gas pipelines across Northern Europe and the UK, essentially, it's a single market. That the price, that shortages in one will be reflected in higher prices across the board. So we're not just because we at the moment import less from Gazprom, the Russian gas supplier. It doesn't mean that we're insulated from shortfalls in gas coming from Russia.
Because essentially we're vulnerable to world gas prices because we are importing gas, and obviously Putin wants the price of gas to go up. And I think this then comes on to the point, doesn't it? You know, we're approaching winter. We've already had significant price hikes in our energy, haven't we? And this is just at the start of the cold spell. Feels to me, you know, I mean, the way the law of Sod's law works is that we're going to have a really cold winter. You've got COVID on top of that. You've got people facing huge increases in energy bills. It's a pretty worrying time, isn't it? Particularly when we're actually strategically reliant on Putin.
And the other thing you need to factor in is that the emissions allowances, the emissions allowances under the European emissions trading scheme are trading about 80 euros a tonne. So on top of that, you've got coal is now incredibly expensive because you've got to factor on top of that the CO2 emissions allowances that consumers have to pay for. So it's not just an availability issue, it's also a price issue. So yes, I think you're right. It's going to be a very hard winter in terms of energy costs.
And you touched earlier, and this is the thing, isn't it, that continental Europe has exposed itself. It's now reliant on Russia, which is I just think strategically so daft, frankly, so foolish for energy. Yes, they could try and find a medium-term alternative source of gas, but we're also strategically exposed because we've got no gas storage, have we? We outsourced that, didn't we?
That's right. The Rough storage facility is effectively sort of taken offline now. But I think the real thing that where British politicians and this government are completely culpable is not developing Britain's own independent gas reserves. I mean, it's not only the continental shelf. We know about fracking and the huge amount of natural gas in the northwest that is there, that the technology is able to release this gas and make it available to the public. And in November 2019, Boris Johnson put a moratorium on developing those reserves, which is now permanent. And it's not like we don't need the gas. We still need the gas. It's just that we are embargoing ourselves.
Yes, which it's incredibly stupid, Rupert. Well, I have to say, once again, I think our Westminster politicians are out of touch with with the views of voters, because I tested this on thousands of doors in the by-election in Bexley, Rupert, and I deliberately said, nobody wants to get rid of their boilers, but actually people are very patriotic, and I said that we should be using British gas, we should be using shale gas. You'll be pleased to know, Rupert, that actually people on the doors completely buy into that. That they know that it's wrong buying Putin's gas. They're not that comfortable, frankly, buying Macron's electricity. I think people want to be self-reliant. They realise the strategic risks.
There's been a big shift going from the Soviet Union to Russia. I mean, ironically, under the days of the Soviet Union, when Western Europe first started using Russian gas, ironically, the Soviet Union never used the gas weapon as a weapon. It always met its contractual obligations. But first of all, in Ukraine, about a decade ago, Putin has shown himself willing to use gas supplies as a weapon against Western Europe. And worse than that, Germany is complicit in this with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is designed to bypass Ukraine and therefore isolate Ukraine. And you know the former Chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schröder, is up to his neck in all this. And so we have to realize that not only is Russia not our friend when it comes to gas supplies, but a lot of continental Europe, and particularly the Germans, have basically switched to the other side. You know, we cannot. They're on the wrong side of this argument.
It's extraordinary, and I think it's really worrying. And sadly, I think it's going to have a real impact, Rupert, on the price of gas, the price of electricity here in the UK. We need to be completely self-reliant. Of course, it's only 11 years ago since we were a net exporter of energy rather than a net importer. Rupert, we could talk all day. Thank you so much for your thoughts. We'll speak again soon without question. That was Rupert Darwell talking about the impact of Russia's actions in the Ukraine on UK energy prices. We're going to go to a break in a minute. Do keep the calls coming. We've got tweets coming here. One interesting about university lecture. I speak with inside knowledge here. A majority of uni lecturers see their respective roles in teaching as secondary. Their primary role is being activists. Well, there we are. That's from Bob. And, you know, it's a real concern. The role of lecturers should be to help pass on knowledge and to help young people learn how to think, not what to think. Keep the tweets coming. Keep the calls coming. 0344 499 1000. It's 12:42. It's Tice Talk here at the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake. Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio. More taste, more flavour.
Reach for the story.
More outspoken.
Error 5092. Argument failed to start.
Talk Radio.
There's still a good argument for listening.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 12:45. We've got lots of tweets coming in. One interesting one here. Since when was freedom a privilege to be earned? I thought freedom was a right, which was fought for and won in 2 world wars. I think that's right, actually. Freedom is a right. It doesn't have to be earned. There have been lots of nice tweets coming in, but obviously I haven't impressed Barry. And actually, he might be right. Barry says, I'm truly amazed, Richard, that as a politician and broadcaster, you had no idea what was happening in Canada. If I know, how come you didn't? Look, Barry, it's a fair point, but the reality is that, firstly, I'm quite humble enough to admit I don't know everything. Secondly, I've been quite busy knocking on doors in Bexley. And thirdly, I just don't recall, maybe you can point me in the right direction, where we saw it in the mainstream media, or maybe they've been hiding it, and maybe you're particularly well informed. Anyway, we're going to go to some calls before we finish the show. Firstly, we've got Mark, who is in Carlisle. Good afternoon, Mark. What's on your mind?
I was just so moved by that lady from Durham University, and I'm worrying for her safety, because the other night I was in London, and outside the Harry Potter Theatre, there was a gang of, that's what you've got to call them, a gang, chanting death threats about J.K. Rowling just because she spoke out. The police were standing there smirking. As soon as the police were going to move them on, they were turned on the police, and they were saying, defund the police, all this. They got violent. You know, this was real chanting, sort of baying mob. So I'm really worried about that lady from Durham University. I'm tempted to sort of say, I'm a filmmaker. I'll come and protect her with a camera crew and just follow her around for a few days if anything happens. So I'm just really moved by what she was saying.
No, I mean, it was moving, as well as being alarming, shocking, and indeed terrifying. And, she is so brave for having the courage to speak out. And look, we all know that it's much easier to keep your head below the parapet than lift your head above the parapet and take the brickbats.
If she has any problems, I'm there with a crew.
Well, that's fantastic, Mark. Thank you for that. Because, I mean, there's no doubt what's going on in universities is not right. It's fundamentally wrong. We've got some great universities, and we've got some, so many great young people, but their minds need to be lifted by having the courage to brainstorm and to say mad things, wacky things, daft things, great things. That's how you progress, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, there's a movement out there. I mean, I've got some techie friends. I'm an investigative filmmaker, and I've seen some of the, it's not dark web, but some of the hidden stuff. There's a cabal out there, there's a movement, and it's very worrying. By the way, Mr. Tice, you're a credit to broadcasting. We need to hear more of you.
You're very kind. Thank you very much. That was Mark from Carlisle with his thoughts about, Sophie and the courage that she showed in speaking out about what's going on in Durham University. And I repeat what I said earlier. If you're aware of similar situations in other universities, then give us a call, send us a direct message. We need to hear more of this stuff. We need to highlight it. I'm really concerned. It is fundamentally not right. I think we've got a call here from John in Essex. John, good afternoon to you.
How you doing, Richard?
Yeah, well, good. What's on your mind, John?
I was watching Fox News on Friday. Tucker Carlson, I'm assuming you know Tucker Carlson.
Of course, yes, indeed.
He had a radio host, a bit like yourself, Glenn Beck, on, and they've found that Anthony Fauci had agreed for the NIAID and Moderna 2 weeks before anyone knew there was a problem in Wuhan to these vaccines. So...
Well, that's a very good question. What is going on? Anthony Fauci does seem, it's pretty extraordinary because, of course, he was involved, it turns out, in approving funding of additional research in the Wuhan laboratory.
Oh, absolutely, through Eco-Alliance.
That's right. So he's and he was very keen for that information not to come out, but it did finally come out. And it's interesting. He seems to have changed his mind on lots of things. It doesn't sound like he gives you much confidence, John.
No, but there's obviously something gone on. There's obviously something going on. You can't have a man, that Anthony Fauci, in charge of your medical establishment for over 30 years. That's a dictatorship. He wasn't elected to that position.
It's interesting, isn't it? It is interesting that he has been a leader. I'm not sure exactly how long, but he seems to have gone on, and therefore, in a sense, he's obviously part of the American establishment. And I'm unaware of essentially who changes that role, whether it's a future president or what. But he's clearly very powerful.
The fundamental question is, why is he agreeing to COVID-19 vaccines before anybody? And they were called COVID-19 vaccines. It weren't like, oh, this is just 2 weeks before anyone knew there was a problem in Wuhan. Why is people need to learn? It's shows like you, right? Because the BBC's gone. It's gone. That's just an illusion now. It is just an illusion. They're so far out of the truth. And the police. I'll tell you what, Richard. Right? I've got family who've served in World War One. My mother's actually got her own sort of little Saving Private Ryan story. There was 5 brothers, and 4 of them actually lost their lives in France.
Got it.
They've actually. I don't know if you know Waterford in Southern Ireland, Waterford Crystal
yes.
Museum. There's actually a monument of the 4 brothers in there.
Wow.
Out of Waterford Crystal, right? I've served in Afghanistan. The police force, mate, what are you doing? Have you lost your minds?
Well,
what they're doing at the minute, the government, they're breaking all the Nuremberg codes. Have broken all of them.
Well, certainly in terms of the police, John, what I'm seeing and hearing when I knock on doors is that people they're concerned about the lack of visibility of police doing what we normally expect them to do, which is to be on the streets, providing reassurance and comfort to people, and actually preventing crime and catching criminals. But
but instead they're oppressing us now. They're going along with the government line, which you haven't got. You don't need too many brain cells to realise all they're doing is lying. If it was that dangerous, they wouldn't have been having parties. But they're happy to keep people away from their dying relatives. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are?
Well, there are. I mean, at the end of the day, we want the police to do their job, their fundamental job, which is to prevent crime and to catch criminals. And I just hear constantly people's concerns.
Buying COVID-19 vaccines 2 weeks before anyone knows there's a problem in Wuhan. That's what they should be doing.
Yeah, I'm unaware about that. Thank you very much indeed. There's John from Essex with his concerns about some of the impact on the vaccines. We've got time for one more call from Susan. Susan, hello there.
Hello, good afternoon, Richard. Thank you for taking my call.
Great to have you. What do you want to say? We've just got a little bit of time.
I want to say several things, but I can't because you need to talk to other people. But I think regarding the possible gas crisis with Putin, I agree with you and other people. We need to put in some plans quite quickly regarding alternative sources of energy, because if Putin wakes up one morning and decides to turn the tap off, we are in serious trouble.
Well, what's clear, Susan, is that continental Europe is in a lot more trouble than we might be. But so do you agree with me, Susan, that we should be actually developing shale gas that we've got easily accessible, safely accessible, literally under our feet here in England?
I don't think we have geographically, we are not suited to drilling shale gas. We should be developing something regarding the sea power, wind power. I'm not particularly in favour of nuclear, but there are other sources.
There are indeed.
We have about 70 million tonnes of rubbish generated every day in this country. We should be doing something with that.
Well, I mean, exactly. We've got to be investing in technology for all the different ways of reducing emissions. I would differ with you, Susan, in respect of shale gas. Shale gas is extracted all over the world in various countries safely, easily. The technology changes and evolving in types of fracking to make it safe, and so that it can be safely extracted, cheaply extracted, as one of a range of sources of different types of energy. That was Susan with her thoughts. Thank you very much indeed. Well, it's been a busy show, lots going on. We've been full on talking about vaccine passports, what's going on in care homes. We've been talking about the wokeness, the snowflakes at universities. Durham's come in for quite a pasting. And we've been talking about Russia, Ukraine, the threats to the UK. But I have good news as we approach the end of the show. the great Bob Mills has landed in the studio. Bob, a very good afternoon to you.
And a very good afternoon. What a cracking show.
Well, you're very kind. Are you going to bring some sunshine and light to our listeners, because it's not very sunny or light outside?
It's pitch black out there, isn't it?
It's unbelievable. It's just like last Sunday.
It is night time. There's no question. It is actually night time. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's as night time as you're going to get.
I've never seen anything like it.
Do you know where we are? Norway. We've moved to Norway. That's what we've done. Or Denmark. These places where it goes dark, and it'll be dark for 6 months now.
Oh dear, it's not very good. Well, given what's going on in politics at the moment,
I wouldn't know.
Lighten the mood.
We ignore entirely what's going on.
You lift the mood. What's going on?
He was having a party. Well, my mum. No, forget it. Listen, we got a lovely lad who's coming and talk about a homeless charity, Tim Bouverie, who I know from writing a wonderful book about appeasement during the war, but he's written a brilliant book called Perfect Pitch about the access to classical music. We all love it, but we're all a little bit frightened of it.
Yes.
Well, Tim's going to explain to you how accessible it really can be. And we finish with music at the end of the show, so it's the same old Oasis show.
Because actually, talking of classical music, I don't listen to it very much, and I agree with you. Actually, it's not that accessible.
Well, people are a bit frightened of it. They hear it because we hear it all the time. Every time we turn the telly, every time an advert comes on, that's classical music.
Yes.
Most TV themes are classical music. And then, but when people start looking into it, and they think, "Oh, hang on a minute, how many 57 symphony in AD minor 7th? Oh, I can't get involved in all." But in fact, if you forget about all that and just pick out certain pieces of music, he's got a book with 100 pieces of music.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'm going to have to get that. He's got a book with 100 pieces.
It's called Perfect Pitch, and it comes with a link to a Spotify thing. Each piece is explained. This is what it is. This is what it's about. This is when it was. And it's a wonderful era, classical music era.
Of course. Well,
most of them knew each other.
I want a signed copy. Fantastic. All of that is coming up with Bob Mills after 1 o'clock. Don't go away. It's been an extraordinary show. We've had lots of calls, lots of tweets. Thank you so much for that. We'll be coming back to some of these big issues: energy prices, student wokeness. And if you've got any intel, then let us know, because we learn by hearing your thoughts, your information. And I really hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you to my wonderful production team. There's no question it's going to be another busy week. Boris has got a big vote in the House of Commons on Tuesday about Plan B. There's then, of course, a by-election in North Shropshire on Thursday. So it's going to be a huge week in the world of politics, in Parliament, and indeed for Boris Johnson